Chapter 549. Yunyang turned his head abruptly, looking at Ji Lingxi in disbelief. Ji Lingxi lowered her head with reddened eyes and said in a low voice, I can't. I didn't agree to it at first, but Sister Lan told me that if I didn't agree to it, only death awaits her. My brother is gone, and if I don't agree to it, she won't be able to marry into the Ji family anymore. Yu Rulan's neck was tied with a red silk handkerchief. With Yunyang's eyesight, how could he not see the faint traces of blood seeping out from there? She had forced Ji Lingxi to submit by threatening her own life and death. That was how this wedding banquet was held. Ji Lingxi lowered her head and sighed softly. Yu Rulan looked over and said with a smile, Lingxi, today is your brother and your sister-in-law's big day. Why aren't you helping to entertain the guests? After today, we're a real family. Ji Lingxi sucked in a breath and said, I'll go right away. She turned and walked into the inner chamber after she said that. Yunyang closed his eyes and heaved a long sigh. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and beamed. Congratulations, congratulations. Sister-in-law has married into my 8th brother's family today. It's truly a match made in heaven. I'm really happy for my brother. I hope that both of you will be united forever and never change your mind. Yu Rulan smiled with her eyes squinted and said, Thank you, brother. Since you've called me sister-in-law, you must drink more today. You're not alone, do you understand? Yunyang nodded and enunciated each word clearly, of course, of course. I've come on behalf of all my brothers today. We must drink until we're drunk. Yu Rulan's eyes gleamed as she said joyfully, then today will be the happiest day of my life. This life is enough. Congratulations, said Yunyang. Just as he was about to say a few more words of praise and prayers, he suddenly felt his throat choking. It was difficult for him to say anything good. The curtain was lifted and Ji Lingxi walked out from the inner chamber. Yunyang looked over and saw that Ji Lingxi had changed into a man's attire. She was dressed in a bridegroom's attire, tall and handsome. What a handsome bridegroom! Yunyang completely understood what Yu Rulan meant when she told Ji Lingxi about being a helper. He had come alone as a representative of the 9 Supreme's brothers, but Ji Lingxi, this little girl, was not only responsible for welcoming the guests and attending to them, she was also responsible for the bridegroom and his family. Embarrassment colored Yu Rulan's pretty face as she said anxiously, Brother Yun, what happened today was a sudden idea of mine. It's also to fulfill both of our wishes. The witness, the officiator, and the guests, will all be Brother Yun. Yunyang sucked in a deep breath and laughed. What are you talking about, sister-in-law? It would be wrong if sister-in-law didn't look for your brothers. Besides, I, Yunyang, am not the only one here today. The 9 Supreme's brothers are united in life and death, never forsaking each other. We are all here together. If I am here, they will be here too. Yu Rulan hugged Ji Lingxi and said happily, Brother Yun, what do you think of us husband and wife? Do we look like husband and wife? Yunyang gulped down his goblet of wine, swallowing the bitterness and unspeakable pain in his stomach along with the wine. He beamed as well and said, Wonderful, wonderful. We are a perfect match, a match made by heaven and earth, a perfect match. The red candles burned brightly. Yunyang's voice seemed to be choked in his heart, forcing it out. Bride and groom, first bow to heaven and earth. Second bow to your parents. Husband and wife bow to each other. The ceremony is complete. The bride and groom had already gone to the bridal chamber to complete the last procedure. Yunyang faced the table full of dishes and wine alone, feeling his throat clogged up. His food tasted tasteless, like wax. Not to mention that Yunyang's bulimia was long gone, even if it was still there, he would not be able to swallow his food now. In his frustration, he could not help but lift the wine pot and gulp it down. Only when he had swallowed the entire pot of wine did he heave a long sigh. A dream of a hero, a lifetime of a beauty. Eighth brother, if your spirit is in heaven, how can you bear to let such a beauty waste away like this, eighth brother? A dream of a hero, a lifetime of a beauty, sigh. Yu Rulan and Ji Lingxi walked out side by side again. Both of them who had crossed cups of wine looked calm, but there were tears hidden in their smiles. Each of them knew the bitterness in their hearts. Yu Rulan was still beaming and beaming, like a bride who had fulfilled her wish and married her husband. Ji Lingxi, on the other hand, looked solemn, her eyes brimming with tears as she held back her grief, trying her best to maintain a cheerful expression. Brother, today is a joyous day. Sister-in-law and your eighth brother are here to give you a toast. You can't be a coward. Yu Rulan picked up the wine pot and the goblet, filling it to the brim. Her slender hand passed it to Yunyang and said with a smile, "The bride is here to give you a toast." Yunyang accepted it blankly and forced a smile. Great wine. I must drink this wine. Even if I have to crawl under the table after drinking, I must drink it. This goblet is to wish eighth brother and sister-in-law a happy life. He raised his goblet and emptied it. The second goblet came. Yunyang sucked in a deep breath and said, "The second goblet is to wish eighth brother and sister-in-law to be husband and wife forever. The third goblet is to wish eighth brother and sister-in-law to be true forever, to coexist with the heavens. The fourth goblet. I'll drink on behalf of the brothers. Brother, don't just drink. Sit down, eat. I'm afraid you'll really get drunk if you just drink without eating. You're here on behalf of all your brothers. Even if you're going to get drunk, you can't get drunk so early, sister-in-law won't agree to that." This meal was the most uncomfortable meal Yunyang had ever had in his life, but he still had to force a smile, toasting and toasting, trying his best to welcome the guests. This goblet is to the brothers. Thank you, sister-in-law. Again. Thank you, sister-in-law. 8 goblets of wine went down Yunyang's throat in agony. Eldest brother, second brother, third sister, fourth brother, fifth brother, sixth brother, seventh brother, eighth brother's wedding wine, I'll drink it all on your behalf. Yunyang's head was swelling as he drank, his eyes glazed over. Not only was this wedding banquet the most uncomfortable meal, it was also the only time Yunyang had drunk himself to death since the battle at Tianxian Cliff. Yunyang's field of vision was cloudy and hazy. In spite of this, it was as if his brothers had really reunited here. Each of them was holding a goblet in their hands, laughing and chatting merrily. Today, with my brothers as witnesses, I, Yu Rulan, have finally become husband and wife with Ji Lingfeng. From now on, I, Yu Rulan, am a member of the Ji family, the wife of the Ji family. From today onwards, I won't look for you anymore, I won't miss you anymore. Because you're already my husband, you're in my heart. You can't run away anymore. You'll be the hero of the world, you'll be the hero of the world. I only need to wait quietly. That's good enough. Ji Lingfeng, don't you ever think of leaving me behind in this lifetime, for all eternity. Yunyang had drunk enough, he had drunk too much. Yunyang could only hear Yu Rulan's words vaguely, brother, it's impossible for sister-in-law to carry on the Ji family's bloodline in this lifetime. This is also sister-in-law's lifelong regret. But there's one more thing, before your 8th brother passed away, he couldn't forget his younger sister. Lingxi's child is also a descendant of the Ji family, right? We can't take care of his younger sister anymore. You must take good care of your 8th brother's younger sister. From today onwards, your 8th brother and I will entrust Lingxi to you. If you're not fated, it's fine, but if you're fated, when you have children in the future, please, have a surname of Ji. To inherit your 8th brother's bloodline. Yunyang did not control his alcohol tolerance at all, nor did he use any mystical skill to force the alcohol out of his system. He was thoroughly inebriated. 3 cups of wine to open one's path, a drunken night to resolve 1,000 worries. Such a wedding, such infatuation, such women, and such an atmosphere. Yun-yang was eager to get drunk as soon as possible. The roads of drunkenness are always stable, but other places are unbearable. I'm alone in this secular world. Yun-yang heaved a long sigh and suddenly burst out laughing. All of you can go and enjoy yourselves. Watch me beat them up all by myself. Ha ha ha. With a plop, he fell headfirst onto the dining table, unaware of what had happened. Looking at the drunk Yun-yang, Yu Rolan sighed softly and said, "Lingxi, come, let us sister-in-law and sister-in-law have a drink as well. How can we not drink on such a joyous occasion? I drank on your brother's behalf just now, it doesn't count." Ji Lingxi had never been good at drinking, and her mood was exceptionally heavy today. She was already tipsy. Now that Yu Rolan had forced a few more goblets of wine into her mouth, she swayed and collapsed just like Yun-yang, following in his footsteps. Yu Rolan sighed softly as she watched Ji Lingxi collapse. She murmured softly, "Lingxi, if you continue to be reserved, Yun-yang, this unromantic man, won't take the initiative in the end, especially when he's carrying too many burdens. Perhaps he won't even have the time, or perhaps he'll place his thoughts on romantic relationships. In the end, he'll end up like me. How can there be no consummation of the wedding today? I hope you won't blame sister-in-law in the future. If there's a bad reputation, let sister-in-law bear it. This is also the last time I can help you." Yun-yang fell into a deep slumber, feeling as if his brothers were already by his side, drinking to their heart's content and chatting loudly. He could not help smiling as he sighed comfortably. "I really miss all of you." His hand moved slightly, as if he had touched something. He flipped over, opened his eyes, and took a closer look. To his astonishment, there was a person lying right beside him. The person beside him was Ji Lingxi, her eyes shut tight and her breathing steady, still in a deep sleep. What was going on? What happened to him? Why was Ji Lingxi sleeping on his bed? What was going on? Yun-yang shook his head, feeling dizzy. Without hesitation, he pushed Ji Lingxi and asked, "You?" Just as he uttered the word, he was shocked to see a flash of red light on Ji Lingxi, who had been in a deep sleep. At the same time, a terrifying aura erupted, as if heaven and earth had suddenly collapsed in front of Yun-yang. A massive, unstoppable force rushed out from the unconscious Ji Lingxi. With a loud boom, Yun-yang, who was the only one bearing the brunt of the attack, was caught off guard and was struck at once. Bang! The window shattered at once as Yun-yang was flung away like a kite with a broken string. He opened his eyes forcefully in midair, only to see the shattered window getting further and further away from him, followed by a wave of excruciating pain. Yun-yang was inexplicably shocked, not knowing what was going on. Why were there so many unexpected situations throughout the day and night? They were getting stranger and stranger, more and more inconceivable. Bang, 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 after breaking 2 more trees, Yun-yang landed on the wall outside with a loud thud. He spat out a mouthful of blood, feeling pain all over his body. Who knew how many of his bones had been broken from the collision? Yun-yang forced himself to lift his head, feeling bewildered. What is going on? Who hit me? Who is it? Yu Rolan, who was sitting alone under the flowering tree facing the moon, could not help being shocked when she saw the situation. She jumped up with a cry and watched the scene unfold in a panic. She had already predicted many possible scenarios. Whether Yun-yang came out looking dumbfounded, embarrassed, or even furious that he had been plotted against, it would not have been surprising. However, coming out looking like he had been beaten up so violently was a huge surprise. It was equally inconceivable. At the next moment, Yu Rolan realized the scariest possibility and barged into the room. Ji Lingxi was still asleep on the bed in the room, her clothes still neat and tidy. It was obvious that she had not woken up yet. There was no third party in the room, no intruder. However, what was going on right before her eyes? Yu Rulan was stunned. Ji Lingxi was still asleep and there was no third party apart from the both of them. Who could have sent Yunyang flying? Looking at the door, she saw Yunyang trying to get up with great difficulty, but he was not strong enough. He was still spitting out blood and his eyes were filled with confusion. Yu Rulan's mouth was agape. Yunyang finally managed to stand up shakily and asked weakly, "Sister Yu, what is going on?" Swoosh, 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 Bai Shue, Yun Xiaoyao, Lao Mei, Fang Mafei and the rest had already flown over, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Yun Yang's current cultivation base was the highest among them, other than Bai Shue. How could he be so heavily injured? If there was an enemy ambush, how terrifying would the enemy be? However, when he took a closer look, his eyes were filled with calmness, without a single ripple. There was no trace of the enemy. Chapter 550. Yun Yang, great young Master Yun, stood up shakily, looking dumbfounded. He could not react to the situation at all. Where am I? What is going on? I was still on the bed just now, wasn't I? There seems to be someone else beside me. There was someone else beside me? Thinking of this, Yun Yang suddenly recalled that the person beside him just now, was it Ji Lingxi? Then, Yun Yang immediately thought that the culprit must not be someone easy to deal with since he had suffered such a heavy blow. Wouldn't Ji Lingxi, who was in a similar position, be in danger? Just as Yun Yang struggled to rush in to check on Ji Lingxi's condition, he saw Yu Rulan walking over to him. Yu Rulan walked swiftly to Yun Yang's side, frowning as she spoke in a low voice, "Brother Yun, you're drunk. How can you do this?" Yu Rulan's cultivation base was naturally higher than that of an ordinary cultivator, but compared to Yun Yang, it was still worlds apart. She did not even think of what Yun Yang's sudden movement could mean. Instead, she thought of another direction. Yun Yang was quick-witted. He realized that the situation was not right after he sobered up and understood the awkwardness of the current situation. Therefore, he had directed a show to conceal and even avoid the current delicate situation. Sister-in-law, you could not be blamed for imagining things like this. Firstly, Yun Yang's cultivation base had reached an extremely high level, far exceeding Yu Rulan's knowledge. It was not within sister-in-law Yu's imagination to be able to throw Yun Yang so far away, especially when Ji Lingxi did not do anything else other than the movement just now. Compared to the fact that Yun Yang had suffered an accidental blow, sister-in-law Yu was more willing to believe that Yun Yang was faking it to avoid some responsibility. As the culprit, she had to do something about it. Yun Yang, who was initially anxious, was even more confused now. "Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? Why don't I understand?" Yu Rulan stomped her feet and sighed, "No matter how drunk you are, you can't molest my sister. Look at what you've done. This isn't over. Your eighth brother isn't here, but I, your eighth sister-in-law, am still here." Yun Yang's eyes widened, filled with confusion and shock. "What? Molest? I molested Ji Lingxi? Wait, was it not the most important thing to confirm Ji Lingxi's condition? Madam Tao Jr., why are you so free to think about indecent things? You think you're so great just because you're promoted and have a job title?" With Yu Rulan's reminder, Yun Yang recalled that when he had just woken up, Ji Lingxi was indeed on his bed and he had even stretched out his hand to push her away. Push, 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 oh. God, push? Yun Yang suddenly recalled everything that had happened just now. The reason why he was thrown out with all his might was actually caused by the sudden burst of power from Ji Lingxi when he pushed her. The entire process was baffling, but it was unstoppable and unstoppable. Yes, then he was sent flying. Yun Yang recalled the feeling of that moment. On one hand, he was sure that there was no third party ambushing him and that Ji Lingxi was safe, but on the other hand, the more he thought about it, the more chills he felt. The power that Ji Lingxi exuded made Yun Yang feel like he was facing a towering mountain or a vast ocean, unreachable and unfathomable. Unfathomable and unshakable. But, what exactly was going on? The more one knew, the more one felt insignificant. Yun Yang had felt the power himself. He had not thought much of it then, but the more he thought about it now, the more fearful he felt. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was unrivaled. Even when he had faced Ling Xiaozui in the past or when he had seen Mr. Nian kill Lei Dongtian and his servant with a single strike, it was incomparable. This power was even more terrifying. It was many, many times more terrifying. After all, be it cultivation base, ability, or experience, the current Yun Yang was no longer comparable to the past. Compared to Yu Rulan, Yun Xiaoyao, who was more experienced in the ways of the world, looked at Yun Yang meaningfully and then at Yu Rulan, frowning deliberately. What happened? Yun Yang, molested, your sister? Yun Xiaoyao's cultivation base was not something Yu Rulan could compare to. He had already sensed Ji Lingxi's movements the moment Yun Yang flew out and confirmed that Ji Lingxi was unharmed. Therefore, he was even more certain that Yun Yang's flying out was just a show, as if his severe injuries were nothing to worry about. It was a piece of cake for a Heaven Realm cultivator to make some noise or even pretend to be severely injured. Naturally, he, like Yu Rulan, thought that it was Yun Yang's way of avoiding the matter. He was happy to see Yun Yang break free from the circle of the inexperienced brat, so naturally, he cooperated with Yu Rulan. Are you trying to escape suspicion with such a method? Dream on. You're covered in yellow mud now. What's more, even if it's really yellow mud, I'm going to turn it into sh*t for you. Yu Rulan's eyes brightened at once. With her intelligence, how could she not hear the hint of encouragement in Yun Xiaoyao's tone? Yes, yes. Otherwise, how could he have been beaten out? Yu Rulan replied. This bastard. Yun Xiaoyao looked enraged. How dare he do such a shameless, insane, and heartless thing? Don't worry, young lady, I'll make sure he gives you all an explanation. As Yun Yang's father, I'll take charge of this matter. What I say goes. If so, this servant lady thanks your highness here. Yu Rulan could finally be at ease. She could not help but feel a tinge of sour joy in her heart. Now that Yun Xiaoyao was pushing from the back, it was much better than pushing it alone. Ji Lingfeng, I've found a home for your sister that she likes. As far as Yun Xiaoyao was concerned, he was happy to see it happen. With his many years of experience, how could he not see what was going on? This was obviously an infatuated lady meeting a crude man. The lady was already willing, but the other side was muddle-headed, or perhaps he had the intention but lacked the guts. In addition, the reason why Yun Xiaoyao was pushing the matter, regardless of his status, was because he had a strange feeling in his heart. With Yun Yang's temper, especially his heavy sense of responsibility, it would be impossible to wait for him to take the initiative to find a wife. It would be a lifelong regret. It was because of these factors that Yun Xiaoyao was so cooperative with Yu Rulan. Otherwise, Yun Yang and Yun Xiaoyao were now official princes while Yu Rulan and Ji Lingxi's identities were, to put it nicely, they were descendants of noble families, but to put it bluntly, they were women of the martial world. How could they hope to marry into a prince's residence? She was not even qualified to be a concubine. This foolish child. If I don't give him a push, I'm afraid, he can only be a bachelor for the rest of his life. Yun Xiaoyao sighed inwardly. Although this fellow had never treated him as a real father, he had long taken him as his own son. As a father, a qualified father, how could he not make plans for his son's marriage? It's just that, this girl, her cultivation base is really high, but she's a little too violent. Yun Xiaoyao said faintly, looking at Yun Yang who was still spitting blood. Yun Xiaoyao had to say this. After all, he had to finish the act. he had to go through with it. Until now, no one thought that it was Ji Lingxi who had hurt Yun Yang. Everyone had known each other from the eastern battlefront before this, so they were well aware of the lady's capabilities. Although she was rather impressive, it was still a fantasy to say that she could hurt Yun Yang. Yun Xiaoyao smiled and called out, "Quickly, heal young master." In spite of this, he no longer cared about his son who seemed to have been beaten to the point of spitting blood. He simply walked away with his arms behind his back. Pretentious. Pretentious. Let's see how long you can keep up the act. Yun Yang returned to his room to lie down weakly, but he still felt waves of confusion and dizziness. Once he lay down on the bed, he fell into a deep sleep. Others could think that he was putting on an act, but he was truly uncomfortable and urgently needed to rest and recuperate. In his daze, he seemed to hear people talking from afar yet close at the same time. It was filled with a surreal feeling of being in a fog, but these words rang in his ears. "A daughter-in-law like this, and you still refuse to acknowledge her?" someone asked in dissatisfaction. Sigh. Someone sighed. "You don't want a son-in-law like this?" Someone asked again. Humph. Someone else was very displeased. "You're a bastard through and through. Bastard on top of that, won't you want your daughter to grow old at home with that thing you gave her? Even if she did, she wouldn't be able to break her defense. I'd like to see who's capable enough to be your son-in-law." "Humph, how can he be my son-in-law if he's not capable? How can your father's daughter be married so easily?" Yun Yang listened to this in a daze. Just as he was about to open his eyes to see what was going on, he realized that his eyelids were as heavy as 1,000 caddies. He could not open them no matter how hard he tried. Vaguely, it seemed like someone had put some medicine in his mouth and his body felt lighter. Then, he heard 5 to 8 people say in unison, "Idiot." It seemed like a few people were scolding someone in unison. Then, all the voices disappeared as if they had never existed. With a soft thud, Yun Yang straightened up from the bed and was surprised to see that there was no one else in the room. His internal organs, which had been in agony just a moment ago, did not feel the slightest anomaly now. As for the dreamlike feeling from before, it was nowhere to be found. Yun Yang scrambled up, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets in shock. His entire body felt light. There was not even a trace of the impact he had suffered just now. To the extent that, his body actually felt even lighter and more comfortable than before he was injured, and his body was more well-rounded and transparent. What was going on? Yun Yang thought back. Drinking last night, this must have happened. Then, he had gotten drunk and passed out. This was also possible, however, after that, what happened after that? How did I get beaten up? Also, who hit me? Ji Lingxi? Impossible. She was still sleeping like a pig when he woke up. No, this is not the main point. How did we end up in the same bed? That was the main point, okay? Yun Yang shook his head and dashed out of the door. Sister Lan. Yun Yang called out when he saw Yu Rolan with her hair tied up and dressed like a married woman when he walked to the door of the courtyard. He felt a pang in his heart. "Call me sister-in-law." Yu Roland glared at him, her tone unprecedentedly icy as if she had touched on a taboo. "Cough, sister-in-law." Yun Yang rubbed his nose. "What do you think you've done?" Yu Roland took the initiative. "You can molest our Lingxi just because you're drunk? You were putting on an act just now. Did you think you could escape responsibility by putting on an act? Why aren't you putting on an act now? You've recovered pretty quickly." Yu Roland's gaze was filled with an expression that said she had seen through all of his disguises. It was inviolable, unquestionable, and undeniable. "Act. Keep up the act. How can you say you've recovered completely now?" Yu Roland asked with a sideways glance. Yun Yang, who had unexpectedly recovered, was speechless. I'll never drink again. But I guarantee that I really didn't do anything. How could my injury be an act? I was really injured, it's just that the injury healed in an instant. Why do I feel that it's abnormal when I hear this? Where's Lingxi? Is she up yet? Yunyang finally asked. He would feel terrible if he did not clarify the matter. She's up a long time ago. Yu Rulan snorted, still looking indignant. Ji Lingxi's voice came from behind the door. Nothing really happened last night. Sister Lan, don't accuse him wrongly. Yu Rulan sighed. I'm impressed by the both of you. One is silly and the other is silly. Neither of you are enlightened. It was truly a pair in the heavens and a pair on the earth. Wasn't it a perfect match? There's no explanation for these chapters, everyone's imagination has filled in the blanks. Today is the Lantern Festival, a family gathering. After the lanterns are released, my wife and I will be high in the sky. Chapter 551. Compared to Yun Yang, Bao'er's regular learning was Yun Xiaoyao's current focus. Yun Xiaoyao, who watched the teachers take turns to teach and supervise the work wholeheartedly, was filled with gratification. Anyone would love a young but obedient child. Yun Xiaoyao's pity for Bao'er grew with each passing day, surpassing that of Emperor of Yutong and Yun Yang, both openly and discreetly. Yutong's war had stopped. Although there were signs of a new storm, it had yet to reach the surface. Bai Shue, Fang Mafei, Lao Mei, and the others had officially taken up the job of security. However, there was no place for them to put their skills to use in the following period of time. Other than the 3 waves of assassinations from the kamikaze suicide squad, there were no other disturbances. It was unusually peaceful. Yun Yang was not surprised. The biggest goal of the 3 waves of kamikaze warriors was to test the residents of Yun's defense and how much they valued the child. The way the residents of Yun had dealt with the waves of assassins was already a clear indication of the problem. Under such circumstances, it would only alert the enemy if they could not kill him in one go. Thus, it was better to hold back a big move and finish the job in one go. However, Yun Yang was unfazed. After all, to him, the scale of the waves that had formed in Tiantang City was nothing at all. Unless the Crown Prince and the rest did not make a move, what awaited them would only be Yun Yang's counterattack once they did. A thunderous counterattack. When the time came, Yun Yang did not mind turning Tiantang City into a bloodbath. Yun Yang had been rather aggrieved during this period of time. He had to pay close attention to Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan's movements almost every day. After that day, his own awkwardness was secondary. Yun Yang was more worried about Yu Rulan, afraid that this new sister-in-law Yu would take things too hard and follow 8th brother to the underworld. Yun Zuyu's incident that day had become another nightmare in Yun Yang's mind other than the battle at Tianxian Cliff. He really did not want a similar situation to happen again. Yun Yang did not move, but the 9 Supreme's forces had grown tremendously. Shui Wuyin had taken over the operations of the 9 Supreme's forces, further expanding the 9 Supreme's underground intelligence network. It was like a giant spider, weaving a network that encompassed the entire continent in strands and strands under the ground where no one could see. Even Yun Yang was in disbelief at Shui Wuyin's progress. Although the movement had yet to be completed, the seeds had been sown in all directions and the basic form was already visible. Moreover, they were all growing rapidly. Yun Yang thought to himself that even if he were to put all his effort into this matter, his efficiency would probably not be as good as Shui Wuyin's. Not most likely, but definitely not. Sure enough, there was a specialization in every field. Shui Wuyin was born to be a genius in this field. Incomparable. Regarding this matter, Yun Yang had only met Shui Wuyin secretly once. For now, we'll target the various countries, cities, armaments, and other aspects as our priority. Once we've completed most of these, we'll release our tentacles into the world of martial artists. Understood. The martial world is filled with all sorts of strange people, unpredictable and unpredictable. The forces that are our enemies are even more varied. If our subordinates are accidentally caught, they'll have to bear the risk of being tracked down. We have to be especially careful and guard against this. I understand. I've long prepared for this. No matter which link has a problem, the connection will be cut off immediately. It won't affect the root. The root of the 9 Supremes is an unknown secret, even to our own people. That's good. Wuyin, what's your future plan? To avenge the boss. What happens after that? I don't have any further plans. Is your focus in the martial world? Or is it the imperial court? Or perhaps, a higher level? I can save the higher level. I lack that kind of aptitude and I don't have such delusions. I've had enough of the martial world's affairs. In the imperial court. I don't like to see people scheming and deceiving each other. The most ideal thing is probably to be able to control this matter from the shadows. That would be enough. It would be a great sense of accomplishment. Is that so? After the conversation, Yun-yang thought about it for a long time and even grew hesitant. Shui Wuyin's thoughts were simple, but the simpler it was, the harder it would be to handle. When the world was unified, the intelligence organization that Shui Wuyin had built would be a weapon that no ruler could ignore. It was because it was an existence that could pose a huge threat to the imperial power. When that time came, both sides would definitely be at odds with each other and it would be difficult to salvage the situation. However, it was no longer realistic to stop now. Yun-yang believed that even if he did not continue to work hard for this, even if he did not tell the emperor, even if the emperor did not agree, Shui Wuyin would have the ability to control this force as long as he wanted to. Furthermore, Yun-yang needed this force very much now. Forget it, let's just let nature take its course. We'll talk about the future in the future. There's no need to worry about it now. Yun-yang thought quietly, as long as I'm alive, this balance will always be there. Even if I die in battle one day, Shui Wuyin's underground force will continue to help Yutong against external enemies. The balance can still be maintained. When His Majesty had nothing to do, he would come to the residence of Yun incognito to check on Baoer's learning progress. This was the most crucial point at the moment. If Baoer's aptitude was limited and he could not be trained, everything would be in vain. In spite of this, Baoer's learning ability had left both His Majesty and Yun Xiaoyao dumbfounded. Baoer's innate aptitude could no longer be described by mere words like genius. No matter what this child learned, not only could he learn it immediately, he could also apply what he had learned and draw inferences about other things from one instance. Baoer could even delve into thinking about certain problems. A day of learning was better than 10 years of study for an ordinary person. His aptitude was beyond imagination, he was a rare talent. On this day, His Majesty and Yun Xiaoyao were discussing the balance of power in the imperial court while Baoer listened quietly. When he heard about the balance of power between the Grand Tutor, Qiu Leng and other families of generals, Baoer actually wore a thoughtful expression. The emperor was intrigued and asked casually, "What do you think about this, Baoer? Do you have any brilliant ideas?" Yun Xiaoyao burst into laughter, obviously finding the question hilarious. The instigator, the emperor, was also amused, not expecting to hear a follow-up answer. How could a child of only 3 or 4 years old know about the issues they were discussing? However, Baoer frowned in thought and said, trying to make both sides feel uncomfortable, yet not feel uncomfortable at the same time. "Grandfather, you're going to be tired." Hearing the abrupt words, His Majesty's hand that was twirling his beard trembled violently. He plucked out 2 strands of his beard and stared at Baoer with widened eyes, his gaze filled with astonishment. Yun Xiaoyao's eyes widened as well. The balance of power between the emperor and his officials, the balance of power between civil and military. Bauer had attributed the key to the emperor. Although this was the truth and the child's words were shallow and childish, the logic behind it was correct. The emperor pondered and asked, "Why did Bauer say that I'm uncomfortable?" Bauer widened his round eyes and said innocently, "It's simple. Grandfather, you don't really want to hit them with the board, so you can only make them afraid of hitting the board. It's like the seesaw that Bauer is playing with. If one side is too heavy, the other side will tilt up. To maintain the balance, both sides can't be too heavy. Grandfather, you're on the seesaw, taking care of the people on both sides. Of course you'll be tired." His Majesty was speechless. Yun Xiaoyao was speechless. "What if you don't want to be tired?" His Majesty asked, holding Bauer in his arms. "If you don't want to be tired." Bauer tilted his head in thought. "As long as there's no one on the seesaw, it will become quiet. Naturally, there won't be a need for another person to balance it." His Majesty frowned and fell into deep thought. Is this another way of saying that I'm completely letting go? But was it appropriate at this time? Following that, the emperor and Yun Xiaoyao began to use other topics to tease Bauer. Bauer's responses were naturally childish, and there were many things he said that did not make sense. Most of the time, he simply looked at the two of them with his mouth agape in confusion, completely unable to understand what they were saying. However, even the answers that allowed them to come into contact with the matter were enough to shock the emperor and Yun Xiaoyao. They were inexplicably horrified. His Majesty, especially, felt comforted that he had a successor. After checking that Bauer's homework was lagging behind, he felt even more satisfied. "Bauer is a genius," the emperor said to Yun Xiaoyao. Yun Xiaoyao nodded. "Not only is he a genius, but he's also an extremely intelligent child. If I had a choice, I really wouldn't want to send such a child into the turmoil of imperial power. Also, don't you think that this child is a little too peaceful? The playfulness and liveliness of a normal child are basically nowhere to be seen. There's actually a child who doesn't like to play." The emperor was unconcerned. "What are you talking about? How can the throne be obtained without paying a certain price? Don't use the example of you staying away from imperial power on Bauer, okay? Besides, doesn't Bauer often play as well? Sigh. A genius has fallen from the heavens. He knows that he has great responsibilities in the future, so he's a little more intelligent now. I actually feel more gratified." Yun Xiaoyao bared his teeth. "You're just imposing your thoughts and set path on Bauer. How dare you speak of it?" "Same here. Don't tell me you're not planning to follow your path back then. I heard from my father that you were different from other children when you were young." His Majesty squinted at him. "What's wrong with my thoughts? Although I'm different from other children now and it's difficult for me to have a happy childhood, I can enjoy the throne for a lifetime. It's obvious which is more important and which is less important." Yun Xiaoyao snorted and rolled his eyes. He did not want to speak anymore. His happiness level, excitement level, and happiness level were obviously different from his older brother the emperor. It was difficult to differentiate between them. Bauer was the emperor's biological grandson and he was only taking care of him. Did he have any right to speak? It was just that Bauer would have to work harder in the future. Sigh, why was Bauer not his biological grandson? Once the thought came to him, Marquis Yun could not help thinking of Yun Yang and the awkwardness between him and Ji Lingxi a few days ago. He actually thought that if Yun Yang had gotten married earlier, he would have a grandson to hug in 3 to 5 years. It's a pity that old Xiao is still unconscious. Sigh, I really want to discuss it with him. His Majesty sighed. Discuss? You should be showing off. If old Xiao knew that you're waiting for him to wake up just to agitate him about not having any grandchildren until now, I think he'd rather sleep than wake up and face your hateful face and infuriating words. Yun Xiaoyao got up and left after saying that. What did you say? Yun Xiaoyao's words were too long and he did not stop halfway through. His Majesty did not realize the true meaning of his words for some time. Yun Yang had been idle for 2 consecutive months. In these 2 months, nothing happened at all. Whether it was the princes or the school of Kismet State, there was no movement. This surprised Yun Yang, but he was helpless. After all, other than ensuring Baoer's safety, he had to watch over Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan. In addition to the fact that his manifestation ability had yet to recover, he could not go out and investigate. Recently, he had always felt that Yu Rulan's will to die had become more extreme. He wished he could keep his eyes open and watch over her every day to ensure that there would not be any mishaps. In addition, Yun Yang knew very well that Ji Lingxi seemed to be full of secrets, earth-shattering secrets. Although the person involved, Ji Lingxi, did not know that Yu Rulan, Yun Xiaoyao, Bai Xue, and the rest had misunderstood him, how could Yun Yang, as the person directly involved, let go of this huge change? Yun Yang, who yearned for supernatural power, was very interested to know, what was the red light that had flashed from Ji Lingxi that day. Every time he saw her recently, a certain someone's eyes would roam over Ji Lingxi like a searchlight. Ji Lingxi was both embarrassed and angry at his behavior. What was this bastard looking at with his lecherous eyes every day? It was as if he was going to strip her naked. She felt uncomfortable every time she saw him. Shangguan Lingxiu had brought her 4 nephews here twice during this period of time. During the second time, Yun Yang had a flash of inspiration and decided to let the 4 children stay. He would let them be Baoer's companions. They could be considered as study companions. His Majesty the Emperor was happy to see this happen. Shangguan Lingxiu was delighted, and the Shangguan family felt as if a pie had fallen from the sky. Anyone could see the status and future of this child in the Empire of Yutong now. Perhaps, as long as he could grow up healthily, the supreme throne of the Empire of Yutong would definitely be his. To be able to be his companions since he was young was a great opportunity to become friends. Even someone as aloof as old Mistress Shangguan would be happy to see it happen. After the 4 nephews were study companions in the residence of Yun, Shangguan Lingxiu came even more frequently. Then, eldest young Mistress Shangguan, Ji Lingxi, and Yu Rulan went back to being best friends. They often went out to play together, cultivated together, chatted together, drank together, and occasionally drank together. They had gone to the battlefield, fought in the war, and faced extreme life and death situations together. If it were not for a certain man, the 3 ladies would have been best friends for life and death. Now that the atmosphere had warmed up, even the source of the problem was invited in for a gathering. The situation was harmonious and subtle. However, the threat was still there. Yun Yang felt that the past 2 months had been too peaceful. A huge sense of danger lingered in his heart. The prince's threat might not be worth mentioning, but where was the school of Kismet State? They would never give up on destroying Yutong's providence. And the 4 Seasons Tower, where had they gone? And Lei Dongtian, where had he gone? It had been a long time since he had returned to the bound of universe. Why was there no news of him? The martial world. Nothing major seemed to have happened in the martial world. It was very peaceful, however, on this day, when Yun Yang was still thinking about how peaceful the martial world was, wondering when the calm before the storm would end, he suddenly felt that the surroundings of the residence of Yun were suddenly filled with a ghostly aura. It was as if the gates of hell had opened abruptly and countless ghosts had rushed out of hell and descended upon this place. Yun Yang paid attention to the movements around him but did not notice anything out of the ordinary. Instead, it was Shui Wuyin who sent him news urgently. The Merciless Tower has turned out in full force and has entered Tiantang City. The Merciless Tower? Yun Yang's attention was immediately drawn to the explosive news. Was the world's second assassin organization other than the concourse of the underworld finally making a move? Another piece of news that came right after made Yun Yang's brows knit together into a deep frown. Hong Zhan, the leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade, one of the top 3 assassin organizations, had also brought a group of men into Tiantang City. After the men of these 2 assassin organizations had entered the city, they were like water droplets merging into the ocean, vanishing without a trace. Who from the Merciless Tower has come? Do you know? Yun Yang asked immediately. The Merciless Tower's leader, Hen Bieli, has come personally. It seems like there are 2 assistant tower leaders as well. I wonder how many of the Merciless Tower's invisible assassins have come. This needs further confirmation. What can be confirmed now is that Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan have come personally. These 2 assassin organizations have sent more than 40 to 50 top-notch assassins. The details have yet to be determined. Yun Yang could not help chuckling bitterly upon hearing the news and sighed softly. The eerie atmosphere that he had felt earlier must have been the arrival of the concourse of the underworld's men. If that was the case, did it not mean that the 3 most renowned assassin organizations in Tianxian continent had all gathered in Tiantang City as if they were on a market day? One could imagine what they wanted to do. It went without saying. The 4 Seasons Tower's venerable lords. What can be confirmed now is that Venerable Lord Ice has entered Tiantang City this afternoon. The details of his movements have yet to be ascertained. The news that followed made Yun Yang realize that a storm was brewing and that danger was imminent. After such a long period of peace, he, or rather, Supreme Cloud, had not made any further moves, but Tiantang City had still become a massive whirlpool of its own accord. Chapter 552. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base and the help of Bai Shue and the others, Yun Yang was not too worried about the concourse of the underworld's capabilities that he had learned and deduced the combat standards of the other 2 assassin organizations that were on par with them, despite being tricky. Even if they were to fight them head-on, they might not necessarily be at a disadvantage. Furthermore, he had a close relationship with the concourse of the underworld, so there was a great chance that he could win them over. However, with the 4 Seasons Tower's involvement, the 3 assassin organizations were not as important anymore. Pay close attention to the prince's movements. Also, keep a close eye on the residences of the few bosses. Don't let go of the slightest movement, Yun Yang ordered. Yes. Shui Wuyin was clear about this as well. The arrival of so many top-notch assassins was far more threatening than before. These people usually hid in the dark, waiting for an opportunity. They would not enter such a big city for no reason. To the assassins, entering such a city would increase the chances of them being exposed. Now that they had appeared in a group, it was enough to explain the problem. It would be a miracle if no one came forward to hire them. Who would hire them then? Who were their targets? The answer was as obvious as a flea on a bald man's head. When night fell, Yun Yang received continuous updates from Shui Wuyin. An expert from a certain sect had suddenly come. There was a sudden increase in the number of nightwalkers. Someone had landed outside the city on a flying mystical beast and disappeared. A one-eyed man had come in, he seemed to be so-and-so. Someone was carrying a strange weapon. Who should it be? The incessant updates made Yun Yang feel like a storm was brewing, his head growing heavier. When midnight came, Yun Yang was still waiting quietly in his study. A thick fog suddenly shrouded the entire residence of Yun. Outside the window, a gust of wind whistled as a voice spoke, "Young Master Yun, how have you been?" Yun Yang smiled faintly and got up to open the window. A silhouette emerged amidst the swirling fog. The newcomer wore a tall crown and nodded at Yun Yang. "Young Master Yun, do you still remember an old friend?" First Court King Qingguang. It was indeed an old friend that he had not seen for a long time. Seeing the visitor, Yun Yang heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Your Excellency King Qingguang, seeing that you've arrived safe and sound, I actually feel relieved." King Qinguang's face was filled with bitterness, as if he could not bear to recall the past. He floated into Yun Yang's room, picked up the teapot on the table and gulped down the entire pot of water, shaking his head. It's a long story. Yun Yang poured the tea calmly and said, "The world is unpredictable, there are pros and cons. Your Majesty's cultivation base has improved by leaps and bounds today. Other than being surprised, I'm very happy for you." King Qinguang rolled his eyes and said, "It's all because of you that the Four Seasons Tower caught us in a deadlock, preventing us from taking the risk to level up. The process was worse than death. Young Master Yun, speaking of which, it's all thanks to you." Yun Yang laughed and poured the tea. Don't be hasty, don't be hasty. I'll give you all my time today. Why don't we talk through the night? Start from the beginning and tell me everything in detail." King Qinguang snorted. Following King Qinguang's narration, Yun Yang finally understood why the Four Seasons Tower had been unprecedentedly quiet during this period of time. "I can't bear to look back on the past. That time, I was really killed by you." First Court King Qinguang sighed and finished the tea in his hand, speaking with a gloomy expression. "You weren't there, you didn't experience it yourself. How would you know that the Four Seasons Tower's attackers were King insane? The four venerable lords led the team and brought the Four Seasons Tower's secret experts to sweep through the concourse of the underworld's bases in the martial world. Once they were discovered, they would fight to the death without a second word." First Court King Qinguang said solemnly, "Do you know? The concourse of the underworld's gold-ranked assassins, there were originally a total of 108 of them. The concourse of the underworld's reputation was largely based on these people's efforts. However, in this short span of half a year, 104 of them have been killed. The few survivors were lucky enough to survive, each of them severely injured. None of them escaped unscathed." The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched. Although Yun Yang had thought that the concourse of the underworld would definitely face the Four Seasons Tower's revenge after the incident, he had never imagined that the situation would be so devastating. In fact, Yun Yang had been collecting information about the battle between the Four Seasons Tower and the concourse of the underworld. However, both parties were extremely powerful. Before the outcome of the battle was decided, there was little information about their casualties. It was only now, from King Qinguang's mouth, that Yun Yang truly knew that these two parties had actually fought to such a devastating extent. If the concourse of the underworld still maintained its original intention and only wanted to use the concourse of the underworld, the more devastating the battle between the two parties, the better it would be. Even if the concourse of the underworld was eventually annihilated by the Four Seasons Tower, they would still have to pay a hefty price. Such an outcome was absolutely beneficial to the Nine Supremes. In spite of this, people could not only think about themselves. If they only wanted to protect themselves, as long as the concourse of the underworld threw out the news that Yun Yang was the Ninth Supreme Cloud, it would be enough to erase all the grudges against the Four Seasons Tower. They could even extort a huge sum of money and the Four Seasons Tower would definitely give in. However, the concourse of the underworld would rather shoulder all the burdens. This was the greatest kindness. Faced with such kindness, if Yun Yang could not return the favor, he would be inconsiderate. There's no need to be so surprised. We're not the only ones who have suffered losses. The Four Seasons Tower isn't doing too well either. More than half of the 48 top-notch experts under the 5 Venerable Lords and the 4 Supreme Lords have been killed by us. There are no more than 10 of them left now. Venerable Lord Ice's heart meridian of the 4 Venerable Lords has been directly broken by us. He's not going to live for long. We've also killed 3 of the Four Seasons Tower's esteemed experts who are said to be on par with the 5 Venerable Lords. They're indeed ruthless characters who are on par with the 5 Venerable Lords. Their subordinates are impressive indeed. Yun Yang asked in concern, to be able to cause such a loss to the Four Seasons Tower, I believe that other than the loss of the 108 gold medallion assassins, the 10 court Yama kings aren't unscathed either, are they? Yun Yang's question revealed his genuine concern. From a certain perspective, the loss of the concourse of the underworld's gold medallion assassins made Yun Yang feel sorry and shocked. However, if the 10 court Yama kings, who were on par with King Qingguang, were to lose members, it would be the last thing Yun Yang wanted to see. Although Yun Yang had only met the concourse of the underworld's 10 court Yama kings once and did not even have a normal conversation with them, they had a deep impression of each other. Yun Yang had a special emotional projection towards these 10 court Yama kings, like the projection of his 9 Supremes brothers. Brotherly affection had always been the weakest part of Yun Yang's heart. If King Qingguang were to say that there were casualties among the 10 court Yama kings, Yun Yang would not feel much different from hearing the news of his 9 Supremes brothers' death. Don't worry, don't worry. We, the 10 kings of the underworld, are all still here. No one is missing. King Qingguang's face was filled with pride, but the pride quickly faded. Let me tell you, child. Don't you dare have any ideas on us brothers. Although none of us 10 brothers have died, we're all severely injured. Those who still have full combat power now are only me and 2 other brothers. First Court King Qingguang sighed dejectedly. The concourse of the underworld, once known as the world's top assassin organization, has been crippled after this battle. Their combined combat power is less than a tenth of what it is now. Yun Yang coughed and said in surprise, "What do you mean by that? You said just now that so many of the 4 Seasons Tower's men have died, but the concourse of the underworld's 10 kings are all still alive. It's obvious that you guys have the upper hand. Don't cry poverty to me. We weren't familiar with each other before this, that's why I thought it'd be a waste not to make use of you and leave after making use of you. I won't do it now, or else I'll look down on myself." First Court King Qingguang chuckled bitterly. "I'm really not crying poverty to you. The reason that all 10 of us brothers are still alive is because we've paid a huge price. Our master, in the Battle of Extinction Valley, for us to survive, he went up against the 4 Seasons Tower's autumn wind, summer thunder, and winter snow alone. He exerted all his potential and fought with the opponent until both sides were injured. The opponent retreated with injuries, but my master has been unconscious since that day. Until now, the concourse of the underworld now only has the 10 of us brothers left, along with 4 gold-ranked assassins. How can we even fight with our current capabilities? What's more, there's no place for us to stay in this martial world anymore." First Court King Qingguang sighed. There was a tinge of regret in his tone. When he had accepted the 4 Seasons Tower's deal back then, it was to repay the debt of gratitude and settle the past, but another reason was that he had overestimated himself and did not think much of the 4 Seasons Tower. After all, the concourse of the underworld had occupied the throne of the world's unrivaled assassin for too long. On the other hand, although the 4 Seasons Tower had the reputation of being the world's unrivaled assassin, it was something that had happened a long, long time ago. What was done, in the end. Who was afraid of who and who could defeat who? It was only when he had personally experienced it that he truly understood how terrifying the 4 Seasons Tower was. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, how could he have believed it? How could he have imagined that the concourse of the underworld's gold-ranked assassins, who had been through hundreds of battles, not only did they not have the strength to fight back when they fought, but the concealment techniques that they were so proud of were completely useless in the opponent's eyes. Bloody battles after bloody battles took place in the martial world that spanned thousands of miles. In places where the world could not see, First Court King Qingguang and the others were immersed in a murderous atmosphere almost all the time. Fortunately, Teacher had brought us away from the concourse of the underworld's headquarters to the haunting temple at the first instance. First Court King Qingguang sighed. The haunting temple was where the 9 Supremes had helped the concourse of the underworld's 10 court kings back then. It was also because of that incident that King Qingguang and the others owed the 9 Supremes brothers a huge favor. In order to return the favor, the concourse of the underworld had suffered a great loss. Strictly speaking, King Qingguang and the others were not without regret. If they had known that they would have to pay such a huge price to return the favor, they would have chosen other ways to compensate or even reveal Yun Yang's identity as Supreme Cloud in exchange for their own safety. The saying that one would lose their conscience in a difficult place was just a saying. However, now that the concourse of the underworld had suffered heavy casualties and had fallen into an irreconcilable situation with the Four Seasons Tower, they had to protect Supreme Cloud's secret instead. As long as the Ninth Supreme Cloud was still around, the Four Seasons Tower would always be a thorn in their side, unable to rest in peace. It was also this irreconcilable mentality that made King Qingguang and the others, who had returned to the haunting temple, enter the temple to cultivate with the determination to die. It allowed the brothers' cultivation base to grow as if they had been reborn, truly ascending to another realm in a single bound. They had succeeded the haunting temple. Because of the haunting temple, the concourse of the underworld had lost to the haunting temple. If they had risen again, it would have been because of this haunting temple. What a muddled account this was. Yun Yang vaguely understood King Qingguang's purpose of coming this time. So, you have come this time. First Court King Qingguang said in a low voice, the main reason we've come this time is that we've sensed that the Four Seasons Tower has shifted the most important strategic deployment to Tiantang City. We have a common enemy, the Four Seasons Tower, so we should work together to defeat the enemy. Tiantang City is your territory, it should at least provide us with some reliable hiding places. Another reason is our master's injuries. He sighed, the Four Seasons Tower's murderous intent towards us hasn't diminished at all until now, it's even stronger than before. If we don't annihilate the Four Seasons Tower, we'll be finished sooner or later. Therefore, the Four Seasons Tower is our top priority now. The ghostly fire in First Court King Qingguang's eyes flared as he looked at Yun Yang and said word by word, we'll work together. Sir. Yun. Sir Yun. Yun Yang smiled meaningfully and said, Your Majesty, First Court King Qingguang, Sir Yun. Sir Yun's words are thought-provoking. First Court King Qingguang said coldly, there's a cause and effect to everything in this world. The karma that's owed due to matters of life and death is destined to be resolved with life and death. If you're not, then why would we have gone against the Four Seasons Tower because of your request? Although the concourse of the underworld rarely breaks their promises, we'll only avoid certain risks at once. Yun Yang frowned and raised his eyebrows. Oh. In fact, Yun Yang was puzzled by the concourse of the underworld's attitude towards him. He had schemed so hard for the deal back then, but not only did the other party fulfill their promise, they did not even pursue the matter after the fact. They had paid such a huge price, yet they still did not seek an explanation from him. Listening to it now, there seemed to be a deeper reason behind it all. First Court King Qingguang sighed, what happened back then, his tone was rather weak. He had to explain the same reason to the other side, and now, he had to explain it to the other side as well, he felt so helpless. So that's how it is, so that's how it is. Yun Yang did not expect that the few people that his brothers had saved by chance that day were actually the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld. At the same time, he was deeply touched. Looking at First Court King Qingguang's eerie expression, Yun Yang felt a little emotional. Strictly speaking, the 9 Supremes had not gathered for a long time, but they had helped countless people and were indebted to them. However, after the 9 Supremes' mishap, what most people did was limited to reminiscing, being grateful, and worshipping them. At most, they would curse the bad guys who had murdered the 9 Supremes. As for those who had stepped forward and done something for the 9 Supremes, those who had really taken revenge for the 9 Supremes into their hearts and put it into action, perhaps there would only be 1 in 10,000 people. Yun Yang would never have thought that this infamous assassin organization in the martial world would remember the debt of gratitude from back then until now. For that debt, they had almost paid the price of annihilating their entire force. Before this, he didn't even know the whole story of this matter. This friendship seemed to be extremely precious. Thank you. Yunyang stood up and bowed deeply at First Court King Qingguang. First Court King Qingguang had always been eerie, putting on his demeanor of a ghost king at all times. However, facing Yunyang's sudden bow, he was flustered. He sprung up and waved his hands. There's no need to do this. Us brothers only ask for peace of mind. Yunyang said softly, I only seek peace in my heart and a clear conscience. Many people say this, but there are only a few who actually put these words into action, even if they are not the only ones. The 10 kings of the underworld, martial world assassins who sell their lives for money, actually have such benevolence in their bones. How can one not sigh? Yunyang said solemnly, on behalf of my 8 brothers, Yunyang thanks all of you. First Court King Qingguang's pale face blushed slightly. To him, he had heard too many praises, compliments, and bootlicking, he should have been immune to them. However, things were very different now. Now, he was receiving praise and gratitude from the 9 Supreme Cloud, and it was genuine and sincere, coming from the bottom of his heart. It was extremely rare. Chapter 553. You flatter me. First Court King Qingguang was a little uneasy from the sudden compliment. We should repay the favor of receiving a drop of water from someone. What's more, it was a life-saving favor. Especially when it was related to a great opportunity. Since we've received such a great favor, it's only right that we do something. Yunyang asked, may I ask where the other Yama kings are now? First Court King Qingguang's expression turned sour as he said sadly, they are now recuperating in a secret place. Wait. I'll bring you there later. Very well. Yunyang understood First Court King Qingguang's cautious approach. After all, the 10 kings of the Dark Azura Temple were severely injured and had almost no combat power to rely on. How could they not be careful? If the enemy found the place, they would all be wiped out. Their past fates had been broken and their standpoints were aligned, there was no barrier between them. Now that they had nothing else to do, both of them took the opportunity to talk about what had happened in the past years, exchanging information and intelligence. First Court King Qingguang suddenly exclaimed, Young Master Yun, your cultivation base is improving really quickly. He could not help but sigh. The last time he saw Yunyang, the latter was only a small shrimp with a mystical chi of 6th or 7th level. Now, however, Yunyang was already in the 3rd heaven realm, almost reaching the level of a 4th heaven cultivator. The speed of his improvement could no longer be described as simply fast. If it were not for the haunting temple forcefully absorbing a large amount of Yin Qi, he might have been overtaken by Yunyang instead. First Court King Qingguang knew himself best. Due to the overly concentrated absorption of Yin Qi this time, the foundation of his brother's cultivation base was not stable. At least, it would be difficult for them to achieve a breakthrough for a considerable period of time. In other words, although everyone's cultivation base seemed to have taken a huge leap forward, the price they had to pay was equally huge. Even if the gains did not outweigh the losses, the disadvantages outweighed the advantages. If Yunyang could still maintain the momentum of his rapid advancement, it would only be a matter of time before he overtook them. In fact, it would not take too long for him to surpass everyone else. You flatter me, Yama King. From Yunyang's point of view, the growth of your cultivation base is truly fast. Yunyang's words were sincere. The last time he met King Qingguang, his cultivation base was also very high, giving him the feeling that he was unattainable and unshakable. However, according to the battle results of his battle with Venerable Lord Saber, King Qingguang's cultivation base was at most at the beginner level of the heaven realm. He was even weaker than Venerable Lord Saber. He had countless fortuitous encounters along the way, harvesting countless treasures of heaven and earth, and even more fortuitous encounters. That was how he was able to achieve his current cultivation base. However, when he looked at First Court King Qingguang again, he was still looking up to him, unable to see through him at all. At the very least, this meant that the current First Court King Qingguang was at least 2 realms higher than his current cultivation base. In fact, it was much higher. The higher one's cultivation base was, the harder it was to improve. The saying that each mountain was a different heaven was very clear. For example, the difficulty for an ace cultivator to advance a heaven was definitely much slower than for a low-level cultivator to advance a heaven. At the same time, it was much more difficult. However, the 10 court Yama kings could rely on the haunting temple to maintain a rapid improvement in such a short period of time while they were engaged in a massacre. It was obvious that the cultivation method of the concourse of the underworld was indeed extraordinary and unfathomable. Yunyang pondered and could not help asking, "Brother King Qingguang, the cultivation method that you cultivate is..." First Court King Qingguang thought about it and answered readily, "There's nothing to hide. Our master discovered a relic by chance back then. There was a unique cultivation method hidden in the relic, a basic cultivation method. After master brought it out and tried to cultivate it, he realized that not only was the cultivation method incredibly powerful, the cultivation speed was also unusually fast. After master switched to this cultivation method, it was only a short dozen years before he was able to elevate himself to a level where he could compete with the world's heroes. It's just that the more mystical the cultivation method is, the stricter the requirements for the cultivator." First Court King Qingguang sighed in relief. He was obviously glad that his master had taken him in as a disciple and not anyone else. Only a basic cultivation method has such a magical effect? May I ask, what are the requirements of this cultivation method? How strict is it? Yunyang asked curiously. It was a huge taboo among cultivators to pry into a cultivator's secret cultivation method. However, Yunyang was overly curious and felt that he and First Court King Qingguang were on good terms, so he had completely ignored the taboo. "Speaking of our lineage, it's truly unique in this world," First Court King Qingguang said proudly. "Our cultivation method's advancement speed is amazing and its power is impressive. However, when it reaches a certain level, we have to return to the original site of the relic to activate the follow-up cultivation method." There's actually such a requirement? It's unique indeed. Yunyang was surprised. What kind of almighty being would be able to make such a restriction? It was inconceivable, unimaginable, and beyond the scope of one's knowledge. Do you know when the relic of your sect started? Not at all. Anyway, it must have been a very, very long time ago. In fact, we've done countless investigations on the origin of our cultivation method, but whether it's passed down from generation to generation or ancient records, there's no clue related to our cultivation method at all. It's as if it has never appeared in this continent. Looking at the tens of thousands of years of Tianquan's cultivation history, we're the first. What's more, when my master wanted to activate the second level back then, he couldn't do it. Couldn't do it? What cultivation requirement is so harsh? Yunyang was getting more and more curious. The requirement is what's strange. It's completely different from ordinary cultivation. The most important requirement is the establishment of the concourse of the underworld. Even the names of the 10 court kings of the concourse of the underworld have to be listed and assigned to their respective duties. Under the 10 court Yama kings, there's also the black and white impermanence, infernal judge, and so on. First Court King Qingguang scratched his head and said, "All these people have to be in place and everyone's cultivation method have to reach the required level. Only then can the concourse of the underworld be truly activated. As long as they reach the required level, being unrivaled in the world is but a joke." Unrivaled in the world? Something to joke about? Yunyang was taken aback. Was this a boast? With King Qingguang and the others' abilities, as well as their masters, this might not be a boast. He asked subconsciously, may I ask which senior left this legacy behind? Why did it sound so classy? According to this method, isn't it like setting up a small imperial court? It's just that it's a little more eerie. First Court King Qingguang nodded and said in agreement, we think so too. However, when I said that the requirement is strange, it really is that strange. The concourse of the underworld has really gone all out to develop in order to obtain the cultivation method legacy and have a chance to advance further. Yun Yang clicked his tongue in wonder. There are indeed all sorts of wonders in this boundless world. The affairs of the world are mysterious and unpredictable. I've really never heard of such a mystical thing. My ears have been opened once again today. First Court King Qingguang said, this isn't the most mystical part. I heard from my master that when he obtained this legacy, there was actually no explanation in the relic. There were only 10 words carved on a large rock. 10 words? Yun Yang prided himself on being well-read. There was hardly anything in this world that he did not know, so he asked curiously, what words? Perhaps we can get some clues from these words. First Court King Qingguang said with a frown, the 10 words on it are without a head or tail. If there were any clues to follow, we would have traced it back to the source long ago. The 10 words are, the morning wind blows in the universe, the clouds float beyond the heavens. We've studied it for many years, but there's no clue at all. Young Master Yun, it's best that you don't waste time blindly. Yun Yang frowned as well, murmuring, the morning wind blows in the universe, the clouds float beyond the heavens? At this moment, he quickly went through all the things in his memory. He scratched his head and said, I have some impression of most of the ancient books on this continent. The major events, experts, and cultivation methods of the past tens of thousands of years. I can also remember them. But why don't I have the slightest impression of these 2 sentences? First Court King Qingguang said in distress, who says otherwise? Logically speaking, how could someone who could set up such a setup be unknown? Since the relic exists on this continent, how is it possible that no one has ever heard of such an earth-shattering expert and left behind no records? Since these 2 sentences were specially carved on the stone, they must have been very famous back then and could represent this person, but I have no recollection of them at all. What is the meaning of this? Yun Yang frowned as he pondered. The matter regarding the concourse of the underworld's legacy was truly bizarre. To be able to leave behind such an earth-shattering, mystical legacy, and to be able to set up such an ingenious setup, to be able to force one to meet certain conditions before proceeding with the legacy, it was truly mysterious and unimaginable. All of this pointed to the fact that the person who set up the ruins must have done so in a very leisurely manner, at the peak of his cultivation, or perhaps even in his twilight years, he still could not find a worthy successor. In the end, he created this test and left it for someone who was fated to do so. This also meant that this person's cultivation base should be far above all the known experts in this world. Then, the saying of being unrivaled in this world was indeed a joke. But, who was this person? How could there be no information or clues at all? Yun Yang's mind wandered aimlessly for a long time before First Court King Qingguang's hopeful gaze slowly turned into a bitter smile. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. It looks like young Master Yun doesn't know the origins of my school either. It was obvious that First Court King Qingguang valued Yun Yang greatly and had high hopes for him. After all, Yun Yang and the 9 Supremes' legacy were equally mysterious and bizarre. Perhaps there was some sort of origin or recognition, but now, it seemed like they were completely unrelated. Yun Yang coughed dryly. I really don't know, but since all of you have received the legacy, there will come a day when you will know the origin of your cultivation method. First Court King Qingguang grinned. That's true. In the end, the haunting temple is still a mechanism that person has painstakingly set up to aid his successor's cultivation. There are a total of 18 of them in this world, and we've only found one now. The other 17 locations that we still don't know of are honey to us, but they're also poison at the same time. Just the one in front of us has almost caused 10 of us to lose our lives. It's an extraordinarily cruel situation. First Court King Qingguang still had lingering fear on his face. If the remaining 17 haunting temples are all as dangerous, I wonder how many of us will survive in the end. There are actually 17 of them. Yun Yang grinned, feeling that the concourse of the underworld's future was getting more and more limitless. Just the resources of the current haunting temple had already allowed First Court King Qingguang and the others to improve so much. If all 17 of them were to be found, how terrifying would the legacy be? It was unbelievable just thinking about it. Perhaps, being unrivaled in this world was not the goal at all. That was the main point. As for the dangers and whatnot, Yun Yang did not think much of it. After all, great opportunities were accompanied by great risks. How could there be a path to the pinnacle of the world without any turbulence? Even if it was the most despicable of novels, no one would write it that way now. Thinking deeper, since the haunting temples were mechanisms that the mysterious expert had set up to cultivate his successor, there must be a chance of survival within. It was just a matter of whether one could find it or not. After midnight, Yun Yang followed First Court King Qingguang out of Tiantang City quietly, sprinting all the way. After many turns and turns, they soon arrived at an extremely secluded spot. It was only when he saw the remaining manpower of the concourse of the underworld that Yun Yang truly understood how bad their situation was. Second Court King Chu Zhang's arm hung limply. A large part of his chest had caved in. It seemed like his leg was broken as well. His body was covered in wounds. He was still barely conscious. However, when he breathed, there was a distinct smell of blood mixed in with his inhaling and exhaling. Third Court King Song's injury was not severe, but one of his ears had obviously been torn off and reattached, still dripping with blood. There was also a stab wound on his right shoulder that almost reached his ribs. King Wuguan only suffered from internal injuries and no external injuries, but it was obvious that he did not have much combat power left. King Yen Luo was the most intact, but his face was pale and bloodless. King Biancheng's right chest had a penetrating wound from the front to the back, and his expression was weary. King Taishan's right leg was almost shattered, and he was unconscious. The other Yama monarchs were also in a miserable state. Other than that, there were 2 other gold-ranked assassins from the concourse of the underworld who were on the brink of death. It was obvious that the so-called lucky survivors were only one more breath than the dead. In the truest sense of the word, it was just one more breath. As for the master of the 10 Yama kings, a thin elder, he was also on his deathbed. His breathing was so weak that it was almost undetectable. Why is it so serious? Yun Yang quickly took out the medicine that Lei Zhentian had given him and fed it to the few people who were in the worst condition. He then sat behind the elder and channeled the endless divine art into him, forcefully preserving his life and preventing death from befalling him. Yun Yang busied himself until the latter half of the night. Only then did he manage to pull the few people back from the brink of death, and they seemed to have improved a little. The exhaustion had exhausted Yun Yang to the point of exhaustion. First Court King Qingguang looked exhausted as well, but there was finally a look of relief on his face. He was no longer as worried as before. At least, after Yun Yang's treatment, their lives were no longer in danger, even though their injuries were still severe. This was the best thing in the world. The rest only needed to recuperate slowly. Even if it took a long time, it was much better than being in a life-threatening situation. It's not a solution for all of you to stay here. Yun Yang looked at his surroundings. The environment here is too poor. It's not conducive to recovery and there are no resources to replenish them. Besides, although this place is secluded, it's not certain that we won't be able to find you if we really want to. If we're really found, I'm afraid we'll have nowhere to escape to. Let's just move all of you to my residence. Yun Yang said, my place is better than here no matter what. The reason First Court King Qingguang and the others had gone to find Yun Yang was because of this. Now that Yun Yang had suggested it, there was no objection and everyone agreed. When night fell, Yun Yang sent his men and Shui Wuin's intelligence network to keep a close eye on all movements. They brought the concourse of the underworld's people to the residence of Yun without anyone noticing and settled them down carefully. Of course, these people could not stay in the rooms on the ground. After all, they were too big of a target, so they had all moved to the underground secret chamber. The underground space of the residence of Yun was large enough. Once the arrangements were completed, Yun Yang could finally heave a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to rest, he unexpectedly heard a panicked voice coming from outside. Yun Yang, are you there? It was Ji Lingxi's voice. Yun Yang sprung up upon hearing her. Hearing the urgency in Ji Lingxi's voice, he rushed out the door immediately. What is it? Sister Lan. Sister Lan is gone. Ji Lingxi's tears streamed down her cheeks. She left a letter and disappeared just like that. I've been looking everywhere, but I can't find her. Yun Yang was stunned, feeling as if a bolt of lightning had struck his head. His body swayed and his vision darkened, almost falling to the ground. Chapter 554. The situation he was most unwilling to face had appeared once again. God, how many more times do I have to endure such a parting? How many more times? I've found him. I'm with Lingfeng now. Don't miss me. Yun Yang, we entrust Lingxi to you. Take good care of her. We'll definitely meet again in the future. I'm very happy, happier than I've ever been. The letter Yu Rolan left behind only consisted of a few short sentences. In spite of this, his words were like a bolt from the blue to Ji Lingxi and Yun Yang. Found him? Together with Lingfeng now? What did that mean? The 8 Supremes had been sacrificed and were no longer in this world. How could they find him then? How could they be together? Perhaps this sentence should be phrased in this manner. How could they be considered to have found him and how could they be together with him? The method was actually very simple, as long as, once the thought came to mind, a chill ran down Yun Yang's spine. It was irrepressible. As for the last sentence, I'm very happy, happier than I've ever been, it seemed to be an expression of heartfelt joy, but the deeper meaning in it only made one feel an indescribable sense of desolation. Those who knew the truth would only have one connection. This woman had finally married herself to Ji Lingfeng and become a member of the Ji family some time ago. She felt that her wish had been fulfilled and she no longer had any attachment to this world. So, she had left just like that? As for what Yun Yang had done in the past, assuming that Supreme Wind was still in this world but could not appear in front of people due to his severe injury or some other special reason, or even that it was inconvenient for him to meet him and he had only taken his 8th sister-in-law away this time, just like how he had taken his sister-in-law away previously. Yun Yang should not fool himself. Scanning through the letter, Yun Yang felt like he had been struck by lightning. After a momentary daze, he sprung up as if his buttocks were on fire and roared, "Go look for him quickly." Therefore, the entire underground world of Tiantang City was mobilized with this command. Not long after, even Yutong's official forces were mobilized by Yun Yang. Yun Xiaoyao had even forcefully mobilized the forces of various gangs and families to conduct a thorough search of the entire Tiantang City, both inside and outside. In just one night, the land within 3,000 miles of Tiantang City had been flipped upside down. Yun Yang, who had passed down the order to look for Yu Rolan, did not wait for the news. Instead, he spurred his red stallion and dashed out of the residence of Yun. With the residence of Yun as his starting point, he spread his deific consciousness to search for Yu Rolan. But after 3 days and 3 nights had passed, there was not a single clue. Yu Rolan was like a snowflake that had melted into this mortal world. There were no waves, no sound, no clues. Although there was a saying that no news was good news, this saying obviously did not apply to the current situation. At least, Yun-yang could not accept it. In his heart, only by finding Yu Rulan, alive and well, could his heart be at ease. The lack of any news made Yun-yang increasingly upset. On the third day, he lost control of his temper, which was rare for him. After 3 days and 3 nights of searching, the whole of Tiantang City knew that there was such a person in this world. Purple-gowned young Master Yun. The title of young Master Yun had become the Shura of the underworld. Fong San was the Merciless Tower's top-notch assassin. He had come all the way to Tiantang City upon receiving the mission this time and had stayed in the inn, not in a hurry to make his move. A good assassin would pay attention to concealing his tracks and observe his target. The more he concealed his tracks perfectly, the less attention he would attract, the smoother the assassination would be and the higher the chance of escaping unscathed. However, Fong San did not like to follow this routine. He was more used to finding entertainment before his mission, adjusting his physical and mental state. Only then could he unleash his ability to the fullest. However, Fong San did not like to go to places like brothels. He had always thought that going there would only lower his standards. Since he had lowered his standards, what fun was there to speak of? Therefore, wherever he went, he would secretly scout and abduct the women of good families, bringing them to his guest room without anyone knowing. Once he was done, he would get rid of the woman and everything would be quiet. At least, there would not be any ripples within a short period of time. With Master Fong San's first Heaven Realm skill, if he could still be discovered doing something like this, he would not be able to stay in this world anymore. Speaking of which, his trip to Tiantang City this time was due to his assassination target. He had been very careful and was always looking for a chance to strike. It was also because of this that he was able to feast his eyes. Tiantang City was indeed the capital of a nation. There were so many beautiful madams and young ladies here. Although he had only been here for a few days, Fong San already felt like he had come to heaven. That night, he went out quietly and effortlessly came to the family he had his eyes on earlier, capturing the family's young daughter who had yet to step out of line. In the inn, the lights were extremely dim. Looking at the trembling beauty, Fong San chuckled and was about to pounce on her to indulge his bestial desires. Unexpectedly, at this critical moment, with a bang, the door of the inn shattered without any warning, as if it had been struck by a thunderbolt, bombarding the world. "Who is it?" Fong San sprung up with his upper body bare. His lustful desire was immediately retracted, leaving only the killer's calm instinct. At this moment, he thought that his tracks had fallen into the eyes of someone with ulterior motives. So what if his tracks were exposed? He was still confident that he could escape unscathed, but this beauty would be wasted. The person at the door was dressed in purple, standing coldly without a word. However, the indescribable murderous aura shot straight to the heavens. "Who are you?" Fong San could sense that the person was an expert, but he was not afraid. After all, the person looked too young. "How dare you disturb the Merciless Tower's Master Fong San? Are you looking for death?" An assassin had always been cautious. Announcing his identity was like putting a protective talisman on himself. Which martial artist would dare provoke the Merciless Tower? What Fong San did not expect was that the Merciless Tower's name was like a fart to the person before him. The purple silhouette flashed and Yun-yang was already in front of the bed. Glancing at the weeping girl on the bed, the murderous intent in his eyes intensified. Then, the saber light flashed and a torrent of energy fell towards where Fong San was. Who exactly are you?" Fong San let out a strange cry and retreated in a sorry state. "Are you mute? Even if there's a grudge between us, you should at least tell me your name first." Yun-yang did not relax at all. Only the saber light flashed brighter as he remained silent. Clang, 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 the two weapons collided twice in the air. Fang Sen felt as if he had been struck by lightning, his body swaying left and right. The unexpected strength caused blood to flow from his nose and mouth. As the saying goes, one small clue can reveal the general trend. How could he not know that his opponent was actually a super expert far stronger than him? He couldn't help but be shocked. Who are you? This is a misunderstanding. Right now, Fang Sen really hoped that this was just a misunderstanding. Otherwise, today would be the anniversary of his death. Unfortunately, even though the current situation was caused by a misunderstanding, today was still the day of his death. Swoosh! A cold and sharp saber light swiftly broke through Fang San's defense and chopped solidly on his neck. Blood shot up into the sky. A head that was filled with terror flew into the air before it was smashed into pieces by a whip kick. The girl on the bed shrieked in fright at the sight of the cruel and bloody scene. In the mist of blood, a faint voice filled with disdain could be heard, "A scum like you. Saying a word before killing you is an insult to myself. Young lady, there's no need to be afraid. Someone will send you back later." Before his words echoed in the air, the purple silhouette had already disappeared. The girl seemed to recall something as she asked in surprise, "You're young Master Yun?" Young Master Yun, clad in purple, was handsome and had the title of Yutong's most handsome man. He had long been the dream lover of Yutong's ladies. The girl's first feeling of being saved was surprise. The surprise of meeting her idol. However, the purple silhouette had already disappeared and did not hear the question. After a while, two people pushed the door open and entered, saying respectfully, "Where does the young lady stay?" "Young master has asked us to send the young lady home." In another inn. A few assassins from the Hall of Crimson Blade were discussing how to infiltrate the residence of Yun and how to kill their target, the child who was only a few years old and had no ability to defend himself. In my opinion, the child is now in the residence of Yun. It's not a good idea to attack by force. Perhaps we can disguise ourselves as merchants delivering necessities to the family. A residence with such a large population would require a lot of daily necessities. Even if it's an ordinary wealthy family, they'll have familiar merchants deliver it directly to their home. What we need to do now is to find out what resources the residence of Yun needs. Who was the one who sent the gifts? As long as we find out, we can act according to the plan. Although there are many experts in the residence of Yun, they might not be aware of these details. Even if the opponent is too strong and we still can't make a move, we can still use the opportunity to investigate the environment in the residence and make our next move easier. Brilliant, brilliant. We can attack and defend at the same time. How wonderful. The group praised in unison. However, at this moment, a cold voice spoke faintly, "Brilliant? How wonderful." The leader of the assassins was shocked and stood up abruptly. "Who is it?" What answered him was a cold saber light that broke through the door and a chilling laugh. "When we go underground, all of you will have plenty of time to discuss how to truly attack and defend at the same time." Blood sprayed. A purple figure spun around the room like a whirlwind. Then, with a whoosh, he went through the door and quickly disappeared into the night. In the room, the 5 to 6 assassins from the Hall of Crimson Blade were lying in pools of blood. Their eyes were wide open, still in disbelief that they had all been wiped out and sent to the underworld. The School of Red Sleeves was a rather famous underground organization in Tiantang City. Although it was known as the School of Red Sleeves, it was actually an underhanded organization that sold women and forced them into prostitution. It was a notorious organization. However, this school had always been secretive and careful. Although many people knew of its existence, not many knew that it was located in Tiantang City. It was also on this night that a purple silhouette suddenly descended. As the purple silhouette descended and checked all the secret rooms and doors of the School of Red Sleeves, a murderous aura erupted. More than 400 people from the School of Red Sleeves were all killed by the newcomer. Even those who were not in the headquarters were found and killed one by one. It was a ruthless extermination, leaving no one alive. That night, the reputable School of Red Sleeves had completely disappeared in a single night, no longer existing in the world. Yun Yang was dressed in purple as he rode ready. He extended his deific consciousness as he galloped, searching for Yu Rolan's traces without concealment. From the inside of Tiantang City to the outside of Tiantang City, wherever there was a slight discovery, he would rush his steed over immediately. For the past 3 days and nights, Yun Yang had not closed his eyes at all. He had literally plowed through the vast area meticulously. In spite of this, Yu Rolan was like a clay ox that had disappeared into the sea, without a trace. Instead, the number of assassins who had died in Yun Yang's hands had reached more than 400 in these 3 days and 3 nights of search. As for the bullies, as well as the clandestine gangs, the number of those who had died under Yun Yang's saber had soared to more than 3,000. Endless air of injustice surged into Yun Yang's body. However, Yun Yang was completely unaware of it. On one hand, he was fully focused on searching for Yu Rolan. On the other hand, he had lost contact with his deific consciousness space for a long time, so he was no longer as sensitive to the air of injustice as before. Naturally, he did not know how much he had gained in this aspect. To Yun Yang now, there was only anxiety in his heart. Sister Lan. Where have you been? Yun Yang's anxiety was indescribable and he could not explain it. He could not find her, dead or alive. Did he really want someone to die of anxiety? Yun Yang continued to gallop inside and outside Tiantang City on his steed, his heart already filled with a sense of loss and dejection. In the cold weather, droplets of water would turn into ice as snowflakes fell continuously from the sky. Drops of snow landed on Yun Yang's face and body, the icy touch chilled his heart even more. After 3 days of intensive search, Tiantang City could not be searched any further. Yun Yang had even searched the entire palace. As for the residences of the princes, they were the focus of attention. None of them were spared, there was no mistake. Now, the only hope was outside the city. Amidst the heavy snow, Yun Yang paced back and forth on his steed alone in the blizzard. His gaze was anxious and tired as he scanned his surroundings. Yun Yang had searched every ravine, every forest, and every grave covered in snow by the side of the road. He had even flipped them open to check. East of the city. West of the city. North and south, Yun Yang paced his steed back and forth in every direction. The search area grew further as the snow grew thicker and thicker. Yun Yang did not give up, ignoring the fact that his deific consciousness was being depleted. Even with his current Heaven Realm cultivation base, he was gradually unable to bear it. It was as if there was a ball of fire burning in Yun Yang's heart, burning his internal organs and bones like they were being roasted. Right now, Yun Yang was already 1,500 miles south of the city. Yun Yang was still searching carefully, trying his best to be patient as he searched bit by bit, but there was nothing to be gained. As time passed and the sky darkened, Yun Yang's heart grew colder and colder. The realization that he had long understood in his heart was becoming harder to resist, but he was still unwilling to give up. He was unwilling to bear the pain of losing his loved ones again. He chose to persevere. Snow fluttered. Yun Yang stood on top of the mountain on his steed in a daze. His purple robe was already filthy. There was also Reddy. Even though Reddy was a handsome horse, it had reached its limit after galloping without rest. It could barely move. Yun Yang suddenly roared into the sky. Do you see it? Do you see it? Huh? Do you see it? How can you bear to do this? How can you bear to leave like this? One by one, they left with you. All of them. I want to leave too. I want to leave. Can I? can I? I've King had enough. Yunyang pointed at the sky and let out a heart-wrenching roar. The snowflakes that filled the sky did not stop because of this roar. They continued to fall quietly. Yunyang finally exhaled dejectedly, collapsing on the crimson horse's back like he had lost all his bones. A desolate sigh left his lips. At this moment, he really did not want to move. He even felt that he did not want to do or think about anything anymore. There had never been a moment where he felt so powerless and dejected. A silhouette flashed in the distance. Yunyang perked up. Sister Lan. Leaping up from Reddy's back, he drifted over like a wisp of green smoke. Amidst the falling snow, a snow-white silhouette stood quietly in front of a mound. Like a statue, she stood stiffly. Just looking at her back, one could already feel the boundless desolation. Yunyang approached her quietly. Who was this person? In addition, the update tomorrow might be later, or there might be no update at all. His cousin's surgery was tomorrow. Chapter 555. Amidst the snowstorm, the trees in the forest were covered in snow, their branches hanging low. From time to time, snow would fall from the branches of the trees. In a small valley, the opposite mountain wall had been flattened like a huge tombstone. In front of the mountain wall, there was a small grave that was also covered in snow. On the other side of the forest, the trees had their upper halves shaved off, leaving only half of the tree stump. It looked like it had been used as a marker. A thin man dressed in white stood alone in front of the grave, his movements slow as he busied himself with something. Yunyang approached quietly. His heart tightened. Could it be that Sister Lan was all ready? Was this person paying homage to her? The man dressed in white was clearing the snow on the grave with his bare hands, not using any mystical chi at all. He was very, very meticulous in cleaning everything. The snow was cleared away, revealing the yellowish-brown soil underneath. He even carefully removed the withered grass on the mound bit by bit, clearing out the entire area around the mound, forming a lonely and unique landscape in the world of ice and snow. Then, he stood there, not moving for a long time. Yunyang approached the area with his heart in his mouth, landing quietly on the snowy ground on the slope. He lowered his body, disappearing into the snow. When he was sure that his breath, heartbeat, and deific consciousness were completely under control, he slowly lifted his head to look. The silhouette in front of the grave was thin, his face pale and his temples graying. He did not look young anymore. His grayish-white hair fluttered in the cold wind, his gaze bleak. He was dressed in white, but he exuded a kind of icy coldness. Yunyang almost cried out. This person was very familiar. In fact, they had already exchanged blows many times. The Four Seasons Tower, Venerable Lord Ice. Yunyang recalled many things at once. Shui Wuin's report, Four Seasons Tower's Venerable Lord Ice has entered Tiantang City in secret. King Qingguang's report, Four Seasons Tower's Venerable Lord Ice's heart meridian has been broken by us. Now, Venerable Lord Ice had appeared here. Why? Who was buried in this grave? Yunyang suddenly thought of Yang Buotao, Yutong's marshal. His father was none other than Venerable Lord Ice. The reason why Yang Buotao had ended up like this was because of his father, Venerable Lord Ice. The wind and snow were howling. Venerable Lord Ice suddenly heaved a long sigh. Tower. Venerable Lord Ice's voice was bleak. I wonder if your wife down there, has she forgiven you? The wind howled, blowing Venerable Lord Ice's voice into pieces. Yunyang's heart leaped. He was right beside Yang Buotao when he died, but what was going on? Your father has let you down. Venerable Lord Ice seemed to have lost all his bones as he sat before the grave, his voice choking. I'm sorry, since you were young, I never raised you. I never fulfilled any of the responsibilities of a father. It was your mother who brought you up. After you grew up, I didn't help you at all. You joined the army when you were young, and you fought for your whole life. You worked hard to get to where you are today. But, it was I who ruined your whole life." The tomb was silent. Only the sorrowful voice of remorse could be heard in the wind. "Did you ever blame your father when you were down there?" "Sigh, it's impossible that you didn't." Venerable Lord Ice grabbed the frozen soil in front of the grave and covered his face, trembling as he wept soundlessly. Yun-yang peeked over and saw 2 streaks of frozen tears falling from the side of Venerable Lord Ice's lips. "Your father has regretted it." Venerable Lord Ice's voice was choked, almost inarticulate. "If God were to give me a chance to start over, your father would destroy his own cultivation base and be an old man who doesn't have long to live in your home." "So what if I don't have long to live? Isn't it better than anything else to have my son and daughter-in-law in front of me? What martial world domination? What invincible in the world? Those are all empty words. It's not as good as offering me a cup of tea. You're all living well without me, but once you've acknowledged me as your father, your family has been destroyed in an instant." Venerable Lord Ice sprawled on the ground, trembling. "I regret it so much. Why do I only understand when I'm fatally injured? Why do I only know regret when everything is irreversible? I've been foolish. I've ruined the blissful days of our family." In the snow, Venerable Lord Ice's tears flowed freely. "I've separated you all with my own hands, I've buried our family with my own hands, I've always thought that I'm the 4 Seasons Tower's Venerable Lord Ice, that I'm the invincible god of ice in the future. As long as we accomplish our goal, I'll be in eternal existence. I've never realized that I've been wrong, that's why I forced you to commit a grave mistake, and for your father's sake, you lost everything. However, I'm severely injured now and I don't have long to live. Only then do I truly know what's the most valuable thing in this world. It's never my regret that I can't become the god of ice, but my son, my family." Venerable Lord Ice's wailing voice shook in the wind. "God! Why did I come to this realization so late? My son had a bright future, a high position and power, he was loyal and devoted, he was a hero. A hero. Yet I've personally caused my son to be cursed for eternity. I've caused his entire life's work to be in vain. My son didn't have a family since he was young. He had finally struggled to have a family, but I, his father, have caused him to lose everything. Am I worthy to be a father? I'm not." Venerable Lord Ice bawled loudly. Perhaps, there was nothing to be concerned about in this barren mountain. Venerable Lord Ice's sobs were not concealed at all. His voice was hoarse. It was at this moment that a voice spoke leisurely. "Venerable Lord Ice, do you know why you've suddenly come to this realization now?" The sobs stopped abruptly. The entire heaven and earth turned into an austere silence at once. Venerable Lord Ice's body froze abruptly. He stood rooted to the spot like a statue. He retracted his emotions swiftly. A moment later, his chilling voice rang sonorously in the air. "Which friend has found this place? Please come out and let us have a good chat." A smirk tugged at the corners of Yun-Yang's lips. Have a good chat? What was there to talk about? They would talk about life and death once they got out. However, Yun-Yang was not afraid. His purple robes fluttered as he appeared before Venerable Lord Ice expressionlessly. He said faintly, "It's been a while. Has Venerable Lord Ice forgotten this old friend already?" Venerable Lord Ice's pupils shrunk as he replied faintly, "So it's young Master Yun." His eyes were filled with a cold killing intent that was slowly accumulating. Yun-Yang could feel that he had discovered Venerable Lord Ice's secret and had seen his weakest side with his own eyes. A pinnacle expert like him could not tolerate it no matter what. Therefore, although Venerable Lord Ice looked calm on the surface, he had already sentenced himself to death in his heart. So Venerable Lord Ice is actually Marshal Yang Butao's father. Yun Yang smirked coldly and said, I didn't expect Yutong's heroic Marshal Yang to have such a father from the Four Seasons Tower. What a surprise. Venerable Lord Ice shuddered and said, Yang Butao is only my adopted son. He paused and said hoarsely, one of my many adopted sons. I like him, that's all. Yun Yang smiled mockingly and said faintly, is that so? The casual tone had ignited all of Venerable Lord Ice's rage. He exploded as he straightened himself and glared at Yun Yang, saying sternly, what does it have to do with you whether I am or not? Yun Yang, do you think you can leave here alive today? Yun Yang smiled eerily and said, whether I am or not has nothing to do with me. I'm not interested to know either. However, whether I can leave here alive today isn't something that an old bastard like you who framed your own son can decide. These words pierced the pain in Venerable Lord Ice's heart. He howled, his hair and beard standing on end as he cried out shrilly, what did you say? Yun Yang replied coldly, are you deaf? Are you really old? The wind howled as Venerable Lord Ice hollered, you're seeking death. His body suddenly turned into a whirlwind amidst the snowstorm, charging towards Yun Yang without a care for his life. Yun Yang did not evade, standing tall like a mountain as he asked faintly, do you have the 9-beam rainbow herb? I'd like to take a look. Venerable Lord Ice, who was charging over, froze in midair as his expression changed instantly, as if a bolt of lightning had struck his head. With a wail, he spat out a mouthful of blood in midair and actually stopped in midair, crying out shrilly, who are you? What do you know? His voice was like an owl's, almost unearthly to those who heard it. The 9-beam rainbow herb. That was the biggest lie he had ever done to his son. It was also the eternal remorse in Venerable Lord Ice's heart. Yun Yang lifted his head slowly and looked at Venerable Lord Ice opposite him, saying faintly, I was by Yang Butao's side when he died. With a swoosh, Venerable Lord Ice suddenly fell from the sky, spitting out a mouthful of blood as he stared at Yun Yang. What did you say? Yun Yang was unfazed as he said, Yang Butao even said a lot to me in the end. Venerable Lord Ice trembled. His aura and murderous intent dissipated in an instant. His eyes were glued to Yun Yang's face, his lips quivering. He had yet to plead, but the look in his eyes was close to pleading. Yun Yang looked at Venerable Lord Ice coldly. He uttered word by word, I know everything. I don't believe it. Venerable Lord Ice roared in a frenzy. Yun Yang did not speak, only looking at him quietly. He knew that Venerable Lord Ice had long believed him. What he said now was just a subconscious act of stubbornness. You don't believe me? Yun Yang asked calmly. Venerable Lord Ice's gaze was unfocused as he trembled. Yun Yang said faintly, since you don't believe me, I won't say it. Venerable Lord Ice took a step forward and said angrily, tell me. What did he say before he died? Yun Yang looked at him coldly and said coldly, are you begging me? Begging? The word had never appeared in Venerable Lord Ice's life. Hearing it now, he was instinctively enraged. You! Yun Yang clasped his hands behind his back and narrowed his eyes, saying, why? Other than framing your own son and destroying his family, don't you know anything else? Don't you even know how to ask for help? Venerable Lord Ice glared at him, his breathing ragged. Yun Yang said indifferently, not only do I know about the 9-beam rainbow herb, I also know that it's to fight against the 9 Supremes. I also know that this is Yang Butao's father's plot and what Yang Butao said. I also know the greatest regret of a famous marshal of his generation. I know a lot more. He smiled. His voice was calm, but it revealed endless cruelty. I know all of this. However, unless someone kneels in front of me and begs me, I won't say it. Kneel in front of you and beg you? Venerable Lord Ice was enraged, almost losing his mind. Dream on. Yunyang nodded. Yes, so I'm going to dream now. You can continue crying here. Right, this is Yangbuetao's cenotaph, isn't it? What's buried here? Why don't I know what else Yangbuetao left behind? Venerable Lord Ice looked like he wanted to swallow Yunyang whole. However, Yunyang was not bothered at all. He smiled faintly and said, "Farewell." He turned to leave. Stop right there. Venerable Lord Ice was already in front of Yunyang in a flash, his hand raised high with snow and ice. Yunyang's gaze was calm, he did not resist. If I fight you now, you're not my opponent. However, even if I don't retaliate, do you dare kill me? Venerable Lord Ice was panting heavily. If you kill me, no one in this world will know about it. Yunyang looked at Venerable Lord Ice with clear eyes. Venerable Lord Ice's gaze was enraged and frenzied, but it slowly turned to worry, fear, confusion and listlessness. Yunyang was just inches away from him and he did not resist at all. He could kill Venerable Lord Ice with a raise of his hand. However, Venerable Lord Ice's hand would not move no matter what. Yunyang said faintly, "I don't want to force you. You look like a pitiful father now, wanting to know what your son said before he died. Logically speaking, should fulfill your wish. According to human emotions, I shouldn't make things difficult for you." Yunyang said coldly, "If it were someone else's father, I'd tell him word for word. Even if he's vicious, even if he's guilty, it doesn't matter. I won't keep this last piece of information from him. But you can't." Yunyang's gaze was abruptly filled with deep disgust and hatred. The vengeance of the 9 Supreme's brothers. The hatred of countless warriors. The tragedy of Yangbuetao's life. Yunyang's heart wrenched. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he cried out hoarsely, "Kneel. Beg me. I'm really sorry for the late update. There's really something, I can't help it. At most 2 to 3 days later, everything will settle down and I'll apologize to everyone." Chapter 556. Venerable Lord Ice shuddered abruptly, his murderous gaze fixed on Yunyang with a chilling gleam. There was only hatred and rage in his gaze, nothing else. Yunyang looked back at him coldly as well. Other than the hatred in his gaze, there was also a chilling gaze that was colder than snow, he would not budge an inch. Sensing the determination in Yunyang's gaze, Venerable Lord Ice realized at once that the other party would not speak if he did not kneel. However, what kind of person was Venerable Lord Ice? How could he kneel? Even when he was at the end of the road and his strength was beyond his reach, he was not willing to yield so easily. Therefore, it was inevitable that the situation had turned into a subtle stalemate. However, Yunyang's aura was growing stronger as time went on, his gaze growing colder as well. On the other hand, Venerable Lord Ice's aura was growing weaker and weaker. Venerable Lord Ice was still severely injured and was no longer as capable as he used to be. Facing Yunyang, who was both physically and mentally in high spirits, he could not help but fall into a disadvantageous position. Pfft! Yunyang took a step forward abruptly, the snow beneath his feet flipping up. His gaze grew sharper as he hollered in a low voice, "Your heart is dead, aren't you going to kneel down and beg me?" Venerable Lord Ice howled almost instinctively, his gaze extremely menacing. "Yunyang, don't you go too far." Yunyang replied coldly, "Go too far? Am I? How can my tactics compare to 1,000th of what Lord Venerable Lord Ice used to be? Lord Venerable Lord Ice has harmed his own son to the point where his family was destroyed and his entire family was annihilated. What right do I have to talk about going too far in front of Lord Venerable Lord Ice?" Venerable Lord Ice waved his arms in a frenzy. "Why must you keep harping on this? Does it give you pleasure to talk about other people's shortcomings over and over again?" With Venerable Lord Ice's status, it was already the lowest he could go. It was equivalent to him admitting defeat to Yun Yang. In spite of this, Yun Yang was still unwilling to let him go. He said with a chuckle, "Yes, it looks like Venerable Lord Ice is very familiar with this. Why don't we share our insights?" Venerable Lord Ice's suppressed rage could no longer be contained. He wanted to explode, but there was nothing he could do in the face of Yun Yang's indifferent expression. He could clearly feel that his opponent's aura had already surpassed his own, and his divine sense had completely locked onto him. Not only did all of this prove that the other party was stronger than him, but he was also determined to kill him. Although he was much stronger than Yun Yang when he was at his peak, the reality now was that he was at the end of his tether. He could only sigh helplessly when facing Yun Yang. Thus, even though the other party had repeatedly humiliated him with the greatest regret of his life, he was powerless to retaliate. Similarly, if he didn't reveal the secret that he wanted, he could only stare at him helplessly. In this way, no matter how one looked at it, the other party had completely devoured him, and he could only allow himself to be slaughtered and toyed with. Thinking of this, Venerable Lord Ice's eyes were filled with sorrow. Who would have thought that Venerable Lord Ice, one of the 5 Venerable Lords, whose name shook the world, would actually fall to such a state? If he had a choice, Venerable Lord Ice would have even thought of ending his life, not wanting to endure such humiliation. However, that might be the last trace of his son in this world. If he didn't know about it, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he died. Yun Yang. Venerable Lord Ice said bleakly, "Young Master Yun. I know that all of you hate me. As Yutong's higher authority, you naturally know what the 4 Seasons Tower has done to Yutong. However, this old man doesn't have long to live now. The previous incident has severed this old man's meridians and I can't do anything about it. Now, I'm only holding on with the last bit of vital qi, barely hanging on. Young Master Yun, of course, you know that the greatest regret in this old man's life is nothing more than what happened to my son. I wonder if young Master Yun can pity a dying old man and know what my son said before he died at the last moment of his life." Venerable Lord Ice's face was old and bleak. For him to say something like this was no different from begging. "I only hope that young Master Yun can tell me. Even if this old man dies right now, even if I'm in the underworld, I'll be eternally grateful." Yun Yang looked at him coldly and said faintly, "The world-renowned Venerable Lord Ice, the pillar of the 4 Seasons Tower, actually has a moment of begging? It looks like you know that you're at the end of your rope and there's nothing more you can do." Venerable Lord Ice lowered his head in humiliation and suddenly coughed, droplets of blood dripping from his mouth. His face turned even paler. Yun Yang snorted and said, "I have no intention of making things difficult for you. Just like what you said, even if a dying old man were to kneel before me, it would be of no benefit to me. However, since I'm asking for help, there's a price to pay for it. I believe that Venerable Lord Ice should know very well what it is that can move me, a higher authority of Yutong." Venerable Lord Ice panted and said, "Please enlighten me, young Master Yun. This old man will do his best to fulfill his dying wish." "The 4 Seasons Tower." Yun Yang said faintly, "I want to know about the 4 Seasons Tower, everything." Venerable Lord Ice's lips moved with difficulty, his gaze growing increasingly complicated as he stared at Yun Yang and said in a low voice, "What young Master Yun wishes to know is equally difficult for this old man to choose. I'm afraid that the 4 Seasons Tower's minor secrets won't be what young Master Yun desires. However, the secrets of the higher authorities are all related to the personal information of my brothers. This old man will never reveal it no matter what." Yun Yang smirked coldly. "Well said. Venerable Lord Ice has made his choice. So be it. How can I be someone who demands anything? I bid my farewell here. I wish Venerable Lord Ice no regrets in dying." Venerable Lord Ice paled at once as he said hoarsely, "I've already betrayed my son, I'll never betray my brothers again. The pain of being stabbed once is already too many times. Young Master Yun, this old man is willing to exchange the secrets of God's bones for my son's last words. As long as you know the secrets of God's bones, you'll understand what the true Four Seasons Tower is. The true Four Seasons Tower? Yun Yang's eyes shone brightly upon hearing this. Yun Yang considered for a moment and said in a low voice, "Fine. You don't want to betray your brothers, you're a man of character. For the sake of the late Marshal Yang, I won't force you. Let it be so." Perhaps young master doesn't believe it, but when did the Four Seasons Tower start? This old man, Venerable Lord Ice, who is second only to one and above tens of thousands, actually doesn't know. The only thing I know is that the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups have been dedicated to one thing. That is, to dominate the world, to subdue the martial world, to seize the providence of heaven and earth, to open God's grave and obtain God's bones, to fuse it into one's own body, to ascend to the pinnacle of martial arts and open the door to Tao. Venerable Lord Ice narrated slowly. Yun Yang's expression remained unchanged, but his heart was constantly weighing and evaluating. If he were to use Venerable Lord Ice's words as the starting point and combine the relevant information he had previously obtained, such as Saber God's Bone, Ice God's Bone. What grave, what subduing the martial world, as Venerable Lord Ice slowly narrated, these scattered pieces of information were gradually connected to form a clearer trail. Who knows how many years ago, the Four Seasons Tower's old sect leader passed away and Mr. Nian ascended to the throne. From then on, no one knew Mr. Nian's true identity or what his background was. As for us, to put it nicely, we're the Four Seasons Tower's super higher-ups who are second only to one and above tens of thousands, but in reality, we're people who Mr. Nian used some special method to find from all over the continent after he ascended. We're people who are qualified to inherit God's bones. When Yun Yang heard this, he interrupted and asked, "How did Mr. Nian know that all of you have the talent to receive or inherit God's bones?" Venerable Lord Ice said, "Sect Master has a treasure that can detect and identify people who are compatible, but I don't know how it works exactly." Yun Yang nodded and said, "May I ask Venerable Lord Ice where God's grave is? Have you gone there personally after you became Venerable Lord Ice?" Venerable Lord Ice answered sheepishly, "No. The truth is, we don't even know where exactly the grave is. What we know is that when the providence of heaven and earth is about right, everyone will work together to open up an unknown space. That place is God's grave. It requires the combined strength of 365 people to do their best to open it. However, the number of people who are suitable to enter can't exceed 12 people at a time. Each person can only stay for a short hour after they enter. At most, they can only obtain a piece of God's bone before they have to retreat, or else they'll be lost in that space forever. Although according to the sect leader, we can still wait for the next chance after we retreat, the so-called next chance is the next process of the providence's circulation and accumulation. It's far away. Therefore, we know that a person only has one chance in his lifetime." Venerable Lord Ice's voice was bitter as he sighed softly. "It still doesn't feel very clear. It's hazy and hard to determine." Yun Yang sighed softly as well. "Indeed, it's hard to determine because we don't understand it ourselves." Venerable Lord Ice chuckled bitterly. "All this while, we've only known that as long as we gather the God's bone, we can be immortal and live as long as the heavens and the moon. And this is already a cultivator's great wish, no one doesn't want it." "Huh." Yun Yang said sensitively, "Could there be some unforeseen event that has hindered your plan?" "It is indeed because of the unforeseen event. Reality has made us realize the truth. It turns out that our hard work has only served to benefit others." Venerable Lord Ice's voice was filled with melancholy and helplessness. It was as if he felt incomparable powerlessness and melancholy towards what he had done in this life, and there was even regret and bewilderment mixed within. Reality? The truth? Benefit? Where did this come from? When Venerable Saber passed away, we brought back the bone of the saber god in his body. Our initial intention was to use Mr. Nian's arcane skill to reassemble fifth brother's soul and implant the spirit bone at once. However, it was only after that incident that we realized that we've always been risking our lives for someone else. Our heirs of the god's bone have always been the same in every generation. Most of the heirs don't even know what they've done in this life until the moment they die. What are they really existing for? They don't even know whose hands the fruits of their efforts have ended up in, who have they helped. Yun Yang was taken aback by her words. What did this mean? How could a profound cultivator like Venerable Lord Ice be so troubled and doubtful about his own cultivation path? If a profound cultivator were to doubt his own cultivation path and could not solve it for a long time, his cultivation base would be stagnant if it was light. It could even backfire and destroy his cultivation base if it was heavy. It was not something to be taken lightly. Has young Master Yun not thought of the crux of this? What I want to say is that the heirs of the god's bone aren't actually us, it's someone else. The purpose of us, the so-called heirs of the god's bone, is to work hard generation after generation to retrieve the god's bone from the mysterious space and maintain the reputation of the Four Seasons Tower outside. When we perish, the god's bone falls into their hands. After so many years of passing it down, they've long collected countless god's bone. And we don't even know how many people like us have already died. At this point, I believe that young master should have concluded that there are still 12 people hidden in the Four Seasons Tower's secret place who have never appeared in the martial world. These 12 people are the true pinnacle of the Four Seasons Tower, the heirs of the god's bone. As for us, we're only the temporary carriers of the god's bone. When we nourish the god's bone to a certain extent, we'll be killed even if we don't die fighting outside. The god's bone will be taken away by those people and the next generation will be trained to retrieve the god's bone. The hatred in Venerable Lord Ice's voice grew heavier. Yun Yang felt his heart skip a beat. The true heirs of the god's bone? 12 people? Venerable Lord Saber and the others only had a piece of the bone of the Saber God and the bone of the Ice God, but they were already so powerful. How many pieces of the god's bone did the 12 mysterious people have now? What kind of terrifying level had their cultivation base reached? So this was the true Four Seasons Tower? It was no wonder that Venerable Lord Ice had revealed the mystery of the god's bone so easily after being pressured. It turned out that the hatred in his heart was so intense. To be honest, it was only a change in the stance of the enemy and himself. The so-called Four Seasons Tower, 4 seasons, 12 months, and 365 days. Venerable Lord Ice chuckled bitterly. These people are only people who are not qualified to stay in the headquarters. They were released to wreak havoc in the world and absorb the providence of heaven and earth. The true higher-ups, other than the few clones of the sect leader who roam the martial world and take charge of the overall situation, the others, have never appeared. The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched. The few clones of the sect leader? You mean that there's more than one Mr. Nian? The Mr. Nian who saved you that day might not be the real Mr. Nian? Venerable Lord Ice chuckled and nodded. That's right. You didn't expect it, did you? Yun Yang had indeed not expected it. This answer was too horrifying, too shocking. Mr. Nian, who had always been a legend in the martial world, was only a clone. Mr. Nian, who had easily defeated Lei Dongtian and his servant that day, could only be a clone. It might sound funny, but my brothers are all pitiful people deep in their bones. Venerable Lord Ice said weakly, after I confirmed the news, before I could inform them in time, I was hunted down by the tower to silence them. I only hope that when young Master Yun faces them in the future. He said softly, I don't ask for mercy, nor do I ask that young Master Yun tell this secret to my brothers. I only ask that they die a quick death. When you can behead them with a single slash, don't let them return with severe injuries. God's bone will be extracted while they're still alive. That feeling is worse than death. A sliver of deep fear flashed in Venerable Lord Ice's eyes. It's probably what they call soul refining. Have you tasted it? Yunyang asked. I have tasted it. The muscles on Venerable Lord Ice's face twitched. Not long ago, I was injured by the concourse of the underworld and escaped with severe injuries. I met the people in the tower and thought that I was saved, but, if it weren't for my two brothers who risked their lives to save me, Venerable Lord Ice's tears fell into the snow. So that's how it is. So this is the truth. This is reality. Reality is actually this terrifying. Yunyang thought about it carefully. Chapter 557. Listening up to this point, Yunyang had already formed a relatively clear clue in his heart. Although the Four Seasons Tower had won the war against the concourse of the underworld, Venerable Lord Ice had been severely injured in the battle and had been taken away by his own people. Venerable Lord Ice had thought that what awaited him was rescue, but he had not expected to be met with a nightmare. The reality was that the Four Seasons Tower's reinforcements had confirmed that Venerable Lord Ice was dead and had decided to refine his soul to extract the bone of Ice God that was being nurtured in his body. Venerable Lord Ice was unwilling to be killed, so he had retaliated with all his remaining strength. With the help of two of his brothers, he had managed to escape with his broken body. In spite of this, a moment of luck could not change the dire situation. The Four Seasons Tower's pursuit would never stop, it was destined to be relentless. Venerable Lord Ice understood this. At the same time, due to the guilt he felt towards his son, he had decided to bring the last part of his life to Tiantang City as a matter of course. As for the fact that Yunyang had accidentally stumbled upon it, it was actually a stroke of luck that made the situation even more complicated. However, perhaps it was because of Yunyang's accidental intervention that Venerable Lord Ice had other thoughts in this desperate situation. Just like what Venerable Lord Ice thought, he had given everything for the Four Seasons Tower, even sacrificing his son's entire family. Yet, he was still treated as a sacrificial pawn. It was only natural that he was inexplicably furious. Before this, he had been utterly disheartened, knowing how powerful and terrifying the Four Seasons Tower was. Even if he wanted to, he could not retaliate. However, Yunyang's unexpected appearance and the sudden change in their stances had extended to this moment of submission due to threats, revealing the Four Seasons Tower's biggest secret. Yunyang sighed. A ruthless character like Venerable Lord Ice would not give in so easily. What he had said was limited to what he wanted to say. Even if Yunyang had not threatened him, the other party would have said it anyway. Conversely, if he did not want to say it, it would be meaningless no matter how Yunyang threatened or oppressed him. Now that the train of thought had been cleared, the most important question was what Venerable Lord Ice had said true or false? Yunyang analyzed carefully and finally came to the conclusion that what Venerable Lord Ice had said seemed to be more than 90% true. In spite of this, it also proved that the Four Seasons Tower's strength had no limits. Even a powerful cultivator like Venerable Lord Ice was only a very, very small part of them. They were existences that could be abandoned at any time. Their true abilities were truly astounding and unimaginable. Yunyang's heart grew colder with such an unexpected gain. This place had nothing to do with Yu Rolan. Where had Yu Rolan gone? After a few days of delay, what would happen? Yunyang dared not even think about it. What you know now is equivalent to knowing the Four Seasons Tower's biggest secret. In the future, following this direction, he would naturally be able to learn more things. In fact, it's something we don't even know about. Venerable Lord Ice said bleakly, I know you want to know more about the location of the Four Seasons Tower's headquarters and the location of each operation, but these, even us brothers don't know about them. Come to think of it, it's a waste for us to call ourselves experienced in the martial world. Ever since we became the Four Seasons Tower's Venerable Lords, more than 99% of our time has been spent in the Venerable Lord's Hall, waiting for orders or practicing martial arts. I've thought that our destination would be to dominate an area, to be like a governor. I've never thought that we're just pitiful creatures who don't even have the right to enter the headquarters." Yun Yang was silent. Indeed, the lives of Venerable Lord Ice, Venerable Lord Sword, and Venerable Lord Saber were tragic enough. They thought that their positions were high and mighty, only below the Four Seasons Tower's master, Mr. Nian, and that their futures were bright and promising. Immortality was only a matter of course. Little did they know that everything was just a trick and a use. However, they had abandoned their wives and children to join the martial world for this temptation and this beautiful future, pledging their lifelong loyalty to the Four Seasons Tower. In the end, not only themselves, even their families and everything else had been sacrificed. In the end, it was only until the end of their lives that they realized the truth. What they had done in their lives was only to be used by others. That was all. Even if they had discovered the truth, it was too late. There was no turning back. They were all alone in this world. Their wives, their sons, their families, they had all been destroyed by their own hands. It was too late. Such a tragedy was the accumulation of the world's greatest tragedy. What was even more tragic was that Venerable Lord Ice no longer had the strength to avenge himself. There was nothing he could do, he could only passively accept this fate. It was even more tragic than that. Yun Yang sighed. Looking at Venerable Lord Ice's body that was shaking in the snow, his initial hatred had long dissipated. He said in a low voice, "Before Marshal Yang died, I asked him, 'Who is your father?' Where was he?" But Marshal Yang only said one sentence. Venerable Lord Ice took a step forward, agitated as he asked in a trembling voice, "What did Tower say?" Yun Yang closed his eyes and said faintly, "He said that no matter how wrong he was and how sinful he was still my biological father. I can't betray him." Tower. Venerable Lord Ice shuddered when he heard Yun Yang's words. His pale face turned even paler as he let out a heart-wrenching cry. A mouthful of blood was spat 30 feet away. No matter how wrong he was and how sinful he was still my biological father. I can't betray him. These were his son's last words to him. Was this his last act of filial piety? To him, as a father, what right did he have to enjoy his son's last act of filial piety? What right do I have to be your father? Venerable Lord Ice fell into a state of utter confusion when he heard the last words. Yang Buto's last words were like a red-hot, sharp steel knife, stabbing straight into the softest part of his body and soul. It was like a thunderbolt had struck him, breaking his insides. Yun Yang sighed softly and said, "Is that the cenotaph you've built for Marshal Yang?" Venerable Lord Ice was filled with remorse when he heard Yun Yang's words, his hands shaking as he sobbed. "I'm such an incompetent father, how could I have the bliss to build a cenotaph for my son? These are the silver, banknotes, and gold that Tower gave me when he urged me to leave," he bawled loudly, completely deranged, leaving only a string of cries, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Yun Yang's ears twitched slightly. Someone else was about to arrive. Amidst the snowstorm, human voices could be heard faintly from a distance away. However, the direction of the newcomers was obviously coming towards them. Listening to the sound of fluttering robes, not only were the newcomers skilled, it seemed like there were quite a number of them. An orderly lineup of experts was about to arrive. Venerable Lord Ice, on the other hand, was in a state of confusion. He was hugging the cenotaph and sobbing, motionless. Yun Yang frowned and reminded him faintly, "Someone's coming." Venerable Lord Ice was still bawling, as if he had not heard what Yun Yang had said. Yun Yang spoke again faintly. Before Yang Buto died, his wife had made arrangements to send their youngest son away. Venerable Lord Ice was already in a state of confusion. However, Yun Yang could not allow him to continue this. Absolutely not. Venerable Lord Ice, who had completely fallen into a state of confusion, was jolted awake. He lifted his head abruptly to stare at Yun Yang and said in disbelief, "What did you say? What did you say?" "Recommend a book." The Banshee's manager. The spiritual meridians have been revived and the Banshees have awakened. A young man has become the new generation of Banshee's manager. How does he manage? Could it be the rule of stealth number 5? Chapter 558. Yun Yang spoke in a low and hurried voice. Marshal Yang has made great contributions to Yutong in this lifetime. Other than the 9 Supremes' blunder, he has no other mistakes. In the end, he used his life to repent for his mistakes. This is the reason why I didn't do anything to the child. He's still alive and well. Venerable Lord Ice was trembling, tears flowing freely from his eyes. Suddenly, he fell to his knees and kowtowed to Yun Yang madly. "Thank you, young Master Yun. Thank you, Lord Supreme Cloud. Thank you, Lord Supreme Cloud." If Venerable Lord Ice still could not tell that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud, he would have lived his life in vain. Yun Yang bellowed, "Silence! Someone's coming." Venerable Lord Ice kowtowed repeatedly in gratitude but did not make a sound. There was a choking sound in his throat but he suppressed it forcefully, not letting it escape. At this moment, his heart was filled with relief and satisfaction. Yun Yang sighed. Yun Yang was already prepared for Venerable Lord Ice to know his identity. The only person beside Yang Butao before he died was Yun Yang, who was disguised as Supreme Wind. There were people from the 4 Seasons Tower who had witnessed it with their own eyes. Venerable Lord Ice knew that he was the one who had heard Yang Butao's last words before his death. Naturally, he would know that this person before him was the Lord Supreme Cloud that the 4 Seasons Tower had been searching for. There was no room for doubt about this. It was just that Venerable Lord Ice could no longer divulge the secret that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud. This was also the reason why Yun Yang had awakened him from his muddled state. In addition, it had also given Venerable Lord Ice one last hope. If you continue to lose your mind and accidentally expose the secret of my identity, you can die but you can't ignore your only grandson, your son's only bloodline, can you? Since you're awake and there's hope, since you can't live anymore, since you still want me to avenge you. I don't think I need to say the rest, do I? Yun Yang did not say these words. However, Venerable Lord Ice was clear about it. It was even more effective than saying it out loud. One was still standing upright. The other was wailing on the ground. Both of them did not speak for a while. Only the few people in the distance were getting closer and closer. Finally, with a whooshing sound, a figure broke through the wind and snow like a goshawk and suddenly landed in this small valley. He glanced around and suddenly laughed out loud. This is really a case of wearing out iron shoes in fruitless search, only to find it by chance without even looking. Isn't this Yun Yang, young Master Yun, who's infamous in Tiantang City and terrorizes the martial world? He guffawed delightedly and mocked openly, "Young Master Yun, why didn't you hide in Tiantang City to ensure your own safety? Why have you come to this dangerous place instead?" While we, the Hall of Crimson Blade, have a goal in Tiantang City this time, I don't think we've offended young Master Yun in any way. His sharp gaze focused on Yun Yang's indifferent face as he continued, "Young Master Yun is a descendant of heaven, the only son of King Xiaoyao. You're supposed to be a heaven's pride, untainted by worldly affairs. I wonder why you've killed the Hall of Crimson Blade. I hope that young Master Yun can give us an explanation." Yun Yang grinned, showing his teeth. Hall Master Hong's words are too self-explanatory and biased. Actually, I haven't only killed the Hall of Crimson Blade's men these few days. The souls of the Merciless Tower that I've killed aren't few either. Perhaps even more than the Hall of Crimson Blade. Therefore, the explanation that Hall Master Hong wants, I have to give it to Hen Bieli as well. Hong Zhan was taken aback. He had thought that Yun Yang would come up with various excuses and even offer many benefits and compensations to ease the tension between them, but he did not expect Yun Yang to be so unyielding. It was as if he was willing to offend two top assassin organizations at the same time. In spite of this, Hong Zhan had still underestimated Yun Yang. Yun Yang lifted his head and stared at Hong Zhan, his purple robe fluttering in the wind as he said coldly, "Even if I'm given another chance to encounter the same thing, these people who've died in my hands will still have to die again." Hong Zhan was stunned on the spot. If it had only been a hint of offense earlier, it was now a blatant and formal offense. Was this a declaration of war? Yun Yang's gaze sharpened abruptly, staring at Hong Zhan's face like a gleaming saber in a dark room. He said coldly, "These people I've killed only represent themselves up until now. It has nothing to do with the Merciless Tower or the Hall of Crimson Blade. Therefore, I hope that Hall Master Hong won't seek trouble for himself." Seek trouble for himself? Hong Zhan's gaze turned unusually dangerous. Who in the entire Tianxian continent would dare say that Hong Zhan was seeking trouble for himself? It had been far too many years since he had heard someone utter these words in front of him. His sharp gaze trained on Yun Yang as he uttered word by word, "Reason?" Yun Yang took 2 steps forward and said coldly, "What the martial artists who come to Tiantang City want to do, who they want to kill, and what missions they want to carry out, I don't think I can control them. It's not my place to control them. Take the members of the 2 top assassin organizations as an example. You're assassins who work for the paycheck. It's understandable for you to target your targets when you carry out your missions. Of course, I can't interfere. Unless the person you want to kill or the mission you want to carry out is related to me, then of course, I have to work with you. Needless to say, Hall Master Hong, you should understand that this is my choice." Hong Zhan nodded and said in a low voice, "Young Master Yun speaks generously and within reason. However, young Master Yun's words seem to contradict your current actions, don't they?" "Contradict?" "Hall Master Hong, why don't you ask your subordinates if they've done something they shouldn't have? In Tiantang City, if there are any martial artists who rape innocent women for entertainment or bully the kind to distract themselves, even if I were to find out about it, I would." Yun Yang flashed a toothy grin and said coldly, "Kill him." Hong Zhan's expression darkened immediately. Yun Yang continued to speak leisurely, "It doesn't matter if it's the Hall of Crimson Blade or any other organization, even if it's you, Hall Master Hong, as long as you break this rule, you'll have no dignity to speak of in front of me. I saw a classmate asking if there's only 1 chapter a day. I'm a little speechless. Perhaps no one can see how many words a chapter has, but we should be able to see how much the brothers have spent on a chapter that's been updated. At the very least, it's 2 chapters combined into 1, some even have 3 or 4 chapters combined into 1. However, I'm helpless as well. There's still a market for the idea that there's only 1 chapter per update. To avoid damaging my reputation, I'll try to separate chapters in the future." Chapter 559. A burly man who had come with Hong Zhan glared at Yun Yang maliciously and said eerily, "Hall Master, why are you wasting your breath on a young master? Since this child has admitted that he killed our men, let's end this here and now. Can't we just kill him directly?" Once his words were spoken, the other experts from the Hall of Crimson Blade were riled up, their killing intent soaring. Hong Zhan was the only one who remained silent with a grim expression. Although he had put on a menacing look of condemnation and his words were harsh and unusually domineering, he did not really intend to kill Yun Yang here and now. With Hong Zhan's way of doing things, why would he use his mouth if he could use his saber? It would save him a lot of trouble to start a fight directly. The reason he did not use his saber at once was that he knew very well that Yun Yang, who had the body of King Xiaoyao's son, was not someone who could be killed so easily. Just this identity alone was enough to make all the assassins in the world shrink back. Yutong had defeated the four empires' encirclement in one fell swoop. Not only was the threat of annihilation gone, but the unification of Tianxian was imminent. If the only legitimate son of the empire of Yutong's King Xiaoyao was killed, the blood feud would be irreversible. What was more, Yutong's young master Yun's martial skill and cultivation base were also extremely troublesome to deal with. Although eldest young master Yun's reputation as a popinjay was widespread in the past, his heroic name of charging into an army of 1,000,000 men alone in the war between Yutong and Dongxian, beheading the generals and capturing the flags, had spread far and wide. In addition, his achievement of defeating so many top-notch experts of the Ma'i sect alone was enough to raise eyebrows and prove that he was a Heaven Realm master. Therefore, eldest young master Yun Yang was a formidable character who possessed unparalleled martial arts skills and the body of King Xiaoyao's son. Kill him with a saber? Whether he succeeded or not, he would only be finding trouble for himself. Even if he had a top-notch assassin organization under him, it was not enough. Once he killed Yun Yang, what followed would be an unavoidable disaster. One man and a top-notch martial world organization would never be able to fight against a powerful empire. Faced with such a huge problem, although Hong Zhan thought highly of himself, he did not dare to place another burden on himself when he was already shouldering an important mission. Therefore, Hong Zhan had already made up his mind regarding the current situation. However, the current problem was that although Hong Zhan had decided not to attack Yun Yang, the 5 subordinates who had followed him here today were not people with foresight who could see the situation clearly. Especially as the boss, he must have the demeanor, aura, and power of a boss. As the saying goes, even if you lose to others, you must not lose in spirit. Even if Yun Yang had a strong background and was highly capable, there were some things that Hong Zhan had to say. After all, the other party had killed so many of his men. Was he not going to say anything at all? This was also the main reason why Hong Zhan had been so aggressive right from the start and patiently listened to Yun Yang's reply. Furthermore, since Hong Zhan knew that Yun Yang was not an idiot, he would naturally connect the dots. Yun Yang would not appear here in such weather to admire the snowy scenery, but for some other reason. Because of this, Hong Zhan believed that this young master Yun would not want to be his enemy, especially not to risk his life to fight him. Therefore, Hong Zhan was sure that Yun Yang would cooperate with his explanation. Despite his arrogant tone and hostile attitude, he had still explained himself after all. As long as he did so, both parties would have room to maneuver and a way out of this embarrassing situation. As for how hostile Yun Yang's attitude was, Hong Zhan was not too bothered. He was the one who had spoken harshly first. How could a noble young master of a noble family take it lying down? It was expected that he would retort. Hong Zhan did not want to pursue the matter at all. If he did, it would go against his original intention. Raping a woman was a taboo in the martial world, so killing them was not beyond reproach. Just as he was about to say something to ease the tension and leave, his subordinates had to say that they wanted to kill Yun Yang at this critical juncture. The words that Hong Zhan was about to say were stuck in his throat, worsening the already tense atmosphere. No, they were about to be at each other's throats. Honestly, Hong Zhan's heart was filled with F*King *T. I know that my subordinates are ignorant and insensible, but I didn't expect them to be so ignorant and insensible that they actually snatched the boss's right to speak. What the F*CK is going on? I'm helpless, I'm speechless. In spite of this, situations that made Hong Zhan even more helpless and speechless came one after another. After all, he was not the only incompetent teammate, he had brought a total of 5 subordinates with him. Big brother. Kill him and avenge our brothers. Another person spoke up. Hong Zhan's expression grew darker, his heart filled with resentment. Boss, please don't let our brothers die with grievances. Another even more ruthless idiot teammate came. Hong Zhan's expression was dark, but he wanted to cry inside. When did I want to let them die in vain? Am I not righteously asking for an explanation for them? Why don't you talk about the terrible things they've done? Do you have the nerve to say it if it were you? Big brother, our brothers' corpses have yet to turn cold. Another person spoke tearfully. Hong Zhan was speechless. What kind of person was Yun Yang? Naturally, he understood Hong Zhan's current thoughts, even more so from the beginning. Naturally, he watched the fellow's predicament with a smile. He looked at Hong Zhan with a faint smile and did not interrupt. However, his smile was filled with a deep meaning and malice. Hong Zhan was the leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade after all. He was someone who could rise and fall, capable of doing what others could not. He glared fiercely at his subordinates and said in a low voice, "We, the Hall of Crimson Blade, live in the martial world. We lick the blood of our blades. There are many things we can do, but those despicable things are not to be touched." He wanted to say, since they have committed the martial world's taboo, they deserve it. Even if young Master Yun doesn't kill them, I will. Words like that, followed by a few harsh words of warning to save face, he prepared to leave. If he had done so, not only would he have gained face, he would have gained something else as well. Even if he could not help but be suspected of being weak, it was not a big deal and it would not affect his dignity. It was at this delicate juncture that the filthy man in white who had been crawling on the ground stood up slowly and spoke in a cold voice, "What is the mere Hall of Crimson Blade? How dare you be so insolent in front of me? Silver Saber Hong Zhan, you're only a small reputation that the scoundrels of the martial world have touted. How dare you be so arrogant? Are you tired of living?" Hong Zhan was stunned by this sudden sentence. He had already prepared a script in his mind and was about to speak fluently, but it was immediately stuck in his throat and could not come out at all. Hong Zhan's mouth was half open as he turned his head to look at the old man who had appeared out of nowhere. He felt like he was being struck by lightning. What's going on? I'm about to give up on my end. What's the meaning of you popping out like this? How am I supposed to step down now that you've said so? You're openly stirring up trouble. Where are you from? Venerable Lord Ice stood tall, his demeanor instantly washed away. His gaze was like lightning as he stared at Hong Zhan and said coldly, "Hong Zhan, kneel down and beg for mercy. Do you really want your grandfather to do it personally and die without a complete corpse? Do you want the Hall of Crimson Blade to be completely annihilated?" Hong Zhan's mouth was contorted in anger. "Who are you?" Hong Zhan was enraged, his murderous intent unparalleled. This time, the murderous intent was genuine. "Who do you think you are? How dare you slander Grandpa Hong by name? Even if you're Ling Xiaozue, the head of the Four Seasons Tower, Mr. Nian, you're definitely not them." Chapter 560. However, Venerable Lord Ice's target was not Hong Zhan, but another person who was a few dozen feet away from him. The other party was an experienced veteran. Despite being ambushed, he reacted immediately. With a loud roar, he advanced instead of retreating, charging back against the current. The crimson saber in his hand was accompanied by the whistling of the wind as he counterattacked with all his might. It was a pity that his opponent was Venerable Lord Ice, one of the Four Seasons Tower's 5 venerable lords. No matter how fast he reacted and how hard he tried, how could he be Venerable Lord Ice's opponent? Boom! The moment the ice blade came into contact, it shattered the counterattacking crimson saber into pieces. The storm of ice blades came crashing down without any hindrance. Under the watchful eyes of Yun Yang and the others, the man's entire body was torn into pieces, even his bones were chipped off and scattered on the ground. He was reduced to a pile of minced meat. Although he was dismembered, it was nothing more than that. Then, the scene fell into an eerie silence. It was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. Hong Zhan's hand slowly pressed on his saber's hilt, his gaze piercing Venerable Lord Ice's face as he asked faintly, "Are you the Four Seasons Tower's Venerable Lord Ice?" The storm of ice blades was Venerable Lord Ice's signature move. Seeing such a famous move, if Hong Zhan, the leader of one of the world's top assassin organizations, could not recognize it, he would not be able to stay in the martial world anymore. Venerable Lord Ice sprung up, his body still encircled by boundless frost as he pounced on Hong Zhan with an odd chuckle. "Hong Zhan, I've long heard that you're one of the top experts in the martial world, ranked 6th in the assassin ranking. It's a coincidence that you're here today. Let's see if the assassin ranking or the Four Seasons Tower's Venerable Lord is stronger." With a wave of his silver saber, a brilliant silver light appeared like the Milky Way had fallen from the sky. With a clang, the saber actually shattered Venerable Lord Ice's ice blades. Hong Zhan hollered, "Is this Mr. Nian's intention?" Not only did he manage to force Venerable Lord Ice back, he had also displayed his abilities perfectly without injuring Venerable Lord Ice. It was obvious that he wanted Venerable Lord Ice to retreat. The reputation of the Four Seasons Tower was too intimidating. With the example of the concourse of the underworld being ambushed, even someone like Hong Zhan was unwilling to rashly establish such an unrivaled enmity. Holding back his attack was already a sign of weakness. He did not pursue the matter of Venerable Lord Ice killing his assassins. Venerable Lord Ice chuckled and suddenly spat, "Hong Zhan, are you afraid? You're actually afraid? The so-called reputation of Jianghu is actually exaggerated. The so-called unfathomable rumor is just a joke." Hong Zhan took a deep breath. In addition, the other party was in the right, so it was true that Hong Zhan should not have taken action, be it for official or personal reasons. However, Venerable Lord Ice, who had appeared next, had obviously killed your men right under your nose. Even when Hong Zhan had already shown mercy, he was still being overbearing and continued to kill. "Are you still not going to do anything? If not, are we still the Hall of Crimson Blade? We might as well change our name to a punching bag." Thinking of this, an indescribable murderous aura surged from Hong Zhan. He had never been so aggrieved in his entire life, nor had he been so passive. Honestly, he could not afford to offend the Four Seasons Tower. There was also the concourse of the underworld as an example, but so what? Now that things had come to this, even if he could not afford to offend them, he had to do it. Especially when Venerable Lord Ice was the culprit who had triggered the current dire situation. He had to be killed. Even if he thought so, even if the Hall of Crimson Blade was to be held accountable by the Four Seasons Tower, Venerable Lord Ice was destined not to see it. "Kill!" Hong Zhan roared. As Hong Zhan's murderous intent towards Venerable Lord Ice formed, he glanced at Yun Yang from the corner of his eyes, praying inwardly that Yun Yang would keep his word and not take the opportunity to attack. He also prayed that these two men were not in cahoots. Hong Zhan knew that his cultivation base was higher than Venerable Lord Ice's. He had even sensed that Venerable Lord Ice's condition was unusual when they exchanged blows just now. It was far from the rumored state, but it was still a huge threat. Once there was a Heaven Realm expert like Yun Yang to help, the outcome of the battle would be difficult to predict. Fortunately, Hong Zhan was relieved after a quick glance. Yun Yang did not move. He did not take advantage of Venerable Lord Ice's perilous state. Hong Zhan's heart immediately relaxed. His saber strike was like an antelope hanging its horn, cleaving out without leaving a trace. Puff, blood splattered. The result of the strike was to chop off Venerable Lord Ice's left hand. It was so easy that even Hong Zhan himself, the one who had struck, was shocked. He knew himself best. Hong Zhan's strike just now was powerful, but its actual lethality was limited. It was 30% real and 70% fake. Most of it was the countless tricks hidden behind. Whether Venerable Lord Ice dodged or fought it head-on, he had a few ways to force his way through. Hong Zhan had a high opinion of Venerable Lord Ice. Although he had some understanding of Venerable Lord Ice's cultivation base and ability from the short exchange earlier, he dared not let it go. The strike was also meant to test Venerable Lord Ice's limits, but he had never expected the lively Venerable Lord Ice to be so weak. A single slash, as Venerable Lord Ice howled, a misty white gas suddenly emitted from his body. He howled fiercely, "Young Master Yun, on account of our past friendship, I have a favor to ask of you. Tell my brothers to avenge me." Suddenly, his entire being swelled up. First, a ray of blood shot out from his body, charging towards where Yun Yang was. His entire person, his entire body, charged forcefully into where Hong Zhan and the other 4 men were gathered. Then, an earth-shattering explosion resounded. An earth-shattering explosion abruptly exploded. Self-destruction. Venerable Lord Ice had detonated all of his energy of soul and life force at this very moment. Chapter 561. Hong Zhan spun as he flew out, covered in dust and dirt. His body was already stained with blood as he spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered a few times before he finally steadied his saber. Lifting his head, he stared at the scene with widened eyes that were filled with disbelief. Venerable Lord Ice was nowhere to be seen. Of his 4 subordinates, the 2 with the weaker cultivation base had turned into ashes in the explosion just now, not even their bones were left. The other 2 had been flung out like gunny sacks and were moaning on the ground, severely injured and in a precarious state. Hong Zhan felt like he was dreaming. He could not help rubbing his temples and mumbling, this, what the F***ck is going on? The leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade felt like he was going crazy, his mind a muddled mess. In his entire life, he had never encountered such a bizarre and inconceivable thing. Was this Venerable Lord Ice crazy? You provoked us without any reason and killed one of us without any explanation. Forget it, at most, the 4 Seasons Tower is used to being domineering, but with your great reputation, how is it possible that you can't even withstand a single strike from my saber? I've chopped off your arm right away. If that was all, it could be said that the rumors were wrong. Venerable Lord Ice's reputation was not worthy of it, he had the reputation but no ability. However, you self-destructed without hesitation afterward. What was going on? Did you rush here to die or did you want to perish together with the enemy because you were unwilling to be humiliated? Isn't this too much? And then, you're clearly throwing your life away and fighting with your life on the line. Why do you still ask others to send you a message and ask your brothers to help you take revenge? Hong Zhan felt as if his brain had turned to mush. He could not think at all. What did you mean by this? Seeing that it was a foregone conclusion, he turned his head in disbelief to look at Yun Yang, only to see Tiantong's young master Yun holding a crystalline object in his hand and stuffing it into his robe. At the same time, he said with a pained expression, "Venerable Lord Ice, have a safe journey. Don't worry, I'll definitely bring your words to you. Your last wish, I will fulfill it for you. Yun Yang will never let down our friendship. Hong Zhan, I say. Young Master Yun." Hong Zhan only managed to say one sentence before he heard 2 painful moans coming from both sides. It was his 2 subordinates who had just regained consciousness. The injuries they had suffered were not light. Their entire bodies were like bloody gourds. If they were not treated in time, these 2 lives would most likely be lost. At this moment, Hong Zhan decided that it was better to take care of the living first. With this thought in mind, Hong Zhan immediately flew over and helped the 2 of them up. He hastily examined their injuries and took out some medicine for them to consume. After a long while, they finally stabilized their injuries. However, when they turned their heads to look, their hearts that had just calmed down became tense again. Their entire bodies stiffened in place. Where was Yun Yang? Where did this guy go? Wherever his gaze passed, the spot where young Master Yun stood quietly was no longer the graceful figure in the fluttering purple robe. Hong Zhan let out a long howl. Sir Yun? Yun Yang? Soon after, he soared into the sky, rising several dozen feet into the sky. Looking around, he saw a purple-clothed figure flashing in the distance amidst the snowstorm. Soon after, he completely disappeared. Why did he leave just like that? Shouldn't you talk to him? And express your opinion on this matter? You can discuss your future standpoints as well. What do you mean by slipping away just like that? The people I met today. Hong Zhan was, of course, a veteran of the martial world and one whose experience in the martial world had reached an extremely profound and thorough level. Now, however, he felt that he was completely befuddled today. He was completely unable to understand what sort of people and things he had encountered today, and he didn't even know why all of this had happened, nor did he know the cause of all of this. They had come, quarreled, fought, killed, and done. Finally, the only thing left was the monk scratching his head in confusion. He felt like he was in a dream, stumbling around in the clouds. Who can tell me, what is going on? How did things turn out like this? Looking at the snowstorm, Hong Zhan mumbled to himself in utter bewilderment. I don't know if this young Master Yun is a friend or foe, but he's a sworn enemy of the Four Seasons Tower. Hong Zhan felt wronged. I've never thought of being the Four Seasons Tower's enemy in my entire life. Yun Yang galloped in the snowstorm. With a long howl, Reddy galloped over from afar like a bolt of red lightning. It sprinted to Yun Yang's side, shaking its head and wagging its tail happily, rubbing its head against Yun Yang's body. Yun Yang mounted the horse. The nine heavens dictum in his embrace kept sending messages. There was nothing in the east, nothing in the west, and nothing in the north. Yu Rulan had disappeared just like that. Yun Yang's mind was in a whirl. Yun Zuyu had disappeared after learning about Supreme Flame's death. She had vanished completely. Yu Rulan had disappeared as well after learning about Supreme Wind's death. I know it's a little selfish of me to say this. Yun Yang murmured to himself, but, have you all never considered how much of a blow it would be to me if you all disappeared and died just like that? Has no one ever thought about me, not even in any way? Yun Yang heaved a long sigh. He asked himself honestly. All his life, especially towards his friends, sisters, and brothers, he had always considered things from their perspective. However, no one put themselves in her shoes and thought for her when it happened around her. To put it cruelly, even if you really can't live anymore, even if you really have nothing left to live for, even if living is just torture, you should at least tell me, shouldn't you? I can't stop you all from seeking death, but I can at least arrange a funeral for you. Then, at least I would have seen the corpse. Look at this now. Yun Yang was unusually frustrated. I can't see the person, dead or alive. All that's left is my heart filled with sorrow and regret and endless unsolved mysteries. Looking at the majestic silhouette of Tiantang City from afar, Yun Yang stopped in his tracks. Tiantang City was right in front of him. This was the wilderness, where snow fluttered in the air. The inside and outside of the city were two different worlds. As long as he went in, this would not be the only thing he would be busy with. However, he could not go in. If so, what should he do then? Subconsciously, Yun Yang scanned his surroundings. His mind was suddenly clear amidst the snowstorm. It was as if he had understood something at this very moment. He hauled towards the sky and said loudly, "This ends here. This ends here." He clamped his legs together. Reddy let out a long hiss and sped into Tiantang City like a bolt of red lightning. At the same time, the guards at the city gate felt a sudden chill, and their bodies shivered. Their brains were frozen to the point that they could not think. Yun Yang's silhouette was already far away and could no longer be seen. A few of the guards finally snapped back to reality and murmured, "Why is it so cold when young Master Yun is here?" Yun Yang did not feel cold. However, he felt that the piece of ice god's bone in his embrace was pressed against his skin, giving him an incomparably strange feeling. This is the only chapter for today. I haven't decided if I should use this piece of ice god's bone. If I use it, I have endless plots to write. If I don't use it, it's the same. Chapter 562. An icy air that seeped into the marrow slowly spread from the piece of ice god's bone. It burrowed into his body. Yun Yang had wanted to stop the icy air. From the beginning, he had never planned to use the ice god's bone himself. After all, there was only one piece. Besides, he did not know if the Four Seasons Tower had any other secret methods to detect it. It was not safe, and it was incomplete. However, ever since he had placed the ice god's bone in his bosom, this cold energy was clearly different from before. It carried a faint but powerful energy, and it was like 100 rivers converging into the sea, continuously surging into his body. He could not even block it. His body was like a bottomless pit. Yun Yang cultivated the endless divine art, trying his best to cut off the icy air. However, something unexpected happened. When the endless divine art was activated, it was as if the dam of a river had been broken. The icy air surged into his body with a loud boom. "Oh!" Yun Yang shuddered. Abruptly, he blurted out, "Emmy?" Other than Emmy, there would be no one else who could do such a thing. His hand was already gripping the ice god's bone in his embrace, ready to toss it out if he could not cut it off. However, he changed his mind at this moment. He allowed the howling icy air to rush into his meridians and disappeared without a trace as expected. It did not take long, only a breath's time before the icy air stopped abruptly. It was as if Emmy had stopped absorbing. Yun Yang looked at the ice god's bone in his hand nervously. He could clearly feel that the extreme chill had faded a lot. Fortunately, the ice god's bone still maintained its original shape and feeling. Luck. Yun Yang deeply felt that his teachings to Emmy in the past had paid off. You could absorb everything that was given to you, but it was best not to touch anything that was not given to you. Even if you wanted to, you could only move half of it. Now, it seemed that Emmy had strictly followed this rule, only absorbing half of it. However, the half that Emmy has absorbed is definitely the most essential half. Yun Yang chuckled bitterly. The rest, perhaps it's not because it's following the rules, but because Emmy doesn't really want to absorb it anymore. It had to be said that Yun Yang's guess was 90% accurate, based on his understanding of Emmy. "Emmy? Emmy?" Yun Yang called out a few times but there was still no response from his deific consciousness. "I can't reach him," Yun Yang sighed. Riding on the crimson horse, he headed towards the Yun mansion. However, he had only traveled 7 to 8 feet when his body suddenly trembled. He thought of something. Although he had lost contact with his deific consciousness space, it seemed like Emmy could still absorb energy from the outside world. The bone of the ice god just now was obviously because of the huge amount of energy within it, so he could sense it. But, if that was the case, then those mysterious crystals that didn't have much energy. Mysterious stones? Wouldn't that work too? If that was the case, the karmic energy of injustice that he had killed during this period of time was also not wasted? The only difference was that he was well aware of it before, but he didn't notice it now. That was all. However, whether it was Emmy, the space, or himself, they all still existed. Understanding this in an instant, the matter that had worried Yun Yang for a long time was resolved at once. He felt a sense of relief in his heart. Since Emmy was fine, the space was fine, and he was fine, then, the two whiteys in the space would definitely be fine as well. Do what you have to do. Yunyang said quietly, I can't stop just because I can't see the results. Stay true to your heart, and everything will be rewarded. He laughed heartily and swaggered off. Venerable Lord Sword, Venerable Lord Snow, and Venerable Lord Frost were burning with anxiety. They had just received the news that Venerable Lord Ice was besieged by the concourse of the underworld. The three of them were already on tenterhooks, rushing over there with all their might. However, before they arrived, they received news that Venerable Lord Ice had been safely rescued by the tower's experts. Just as they felt relieved, they heard that Venerable Lord Ice had actually lost his mind and killed the person who had rescued him before disappearing without a trace. Sword, Snow, and Frost were even more anxious now. They couldn't make heads or tails of it. How could someone like Venerable Lord Ice suddenly lose his mind? This shouldn't be the case. However, when they asked further, they received no reply. Once we find the ice, everything will come to light. The three of them shared the same thought, immediately sending out orders to the martial world to inquire. It was only after a few days that they received news that Venerable Lord Ice seemed to have gone to Tiantang City. Thinking of how Ice's son's family had been destroyed because of the Four Seasons Tower, the three of them understood Venerable Lord Ice's feelings very well, rushing towards Tiantang City in unison. Amidst the snowstorm, the three of them checked into the tower to heaven in the moment they entered Tiantang City. This was the secret rendezvous point that had been set up after the last time. As for the secret rendezvous code, only the brothers themselves knew it. If Venerable Lord Ice had come to Tiantang City, he would definitely have left a message here. Just as they settled in, Venerable Lord Frost went out to check impatiently. He returned in an instant. How was it? Venerable Lord Sword was the most impatient. Ice did leave a message, but I didn't understand it. Venerable Lord Frost's expression was grim as he said, take a look for yourselves. I copied it. If you two don't believe me, you can take a look yourself. It's just over there anyway. Venerable Lord Sword and Venerable Lord Snow looked at each other. What was this? Since when did they have to speak with such a suspicious tone between their brothers? Venerable Lord Snow received it and his jaw dropped after a glance. He lifted his head abruptly to look at Venerable Lord Frost. Venerable Lord Frost's expression was cold and bitter, his expression dark as he grinned like he was about to cry and laugh. Just like this. Venerable Lord Sword had seen it as well. His thick brows knitted together as he could not help asking, is this really left by ice? Venerable Lord Frost's expression darkened as he stood up abruptly. I knew you would ask this. Follow me. Venerable Lord Sword knew that his words were inappropriate and wanted to explain, but Venerable Lord Frost had already strode out without turning back. Both of them could only follow. Coming to the hidden corner of the wall, the three brothers looked at each other in bewilderment as they read the message sent by the jade-like ice. Freezing water into ice and turning ice into jade, that was Venerable Lord Ice's signature skill. In this world, only Venerable Lord Ice alone could do this. Other than that, even Nian leader, Ling Xiaozue, Du Guchou, and the rest, whose cultivation base was much higher than Venerable Lord Ice's, would not be able to leave a message with an ice jade like this. Once they saw it, they could immediately confirm that it was indeed left by Venerable Lord Ice. In addition, it had been left behind when there was nothing to worry about. But how is this possible? Venerable Lord Sword exclaimed, feeling a little lost for a moment. Nothing is impossible. Venerable Lord Frost's expression was grim. His pale face was now shrouded in a layer of black. He gritted his teeth and said, from what I see, not only is this possible, I'm afraid this is the truth. Venerable Lord Snow sucked in a deep breath and said, I think so too. The three of them stood in the snowstorm as the snow continued to fall. It did not take long before the three of them turned into snowmen at the same time, stiff and motionless. The impact of this incident was earth-shattering to the three of them. It was as if the entire world had crumbled at this moment. The so-called Venerable Lord is only a chess piece. Once he dies, his god's bones are retrieved to be used by someone else. Even if he doesn't die, once his god's bones mature and absorb the air of vitality, only death awaits him. Everything that Venerable Lord Ice had encountered was written clearly on it. Everything that Venerable Lord Ice knew was added as well. However, the trio felt chills run down their spines when they read it, as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Chapter 563. The sword light flashed in the snowstorm. The message left behind by Venerable Lord Ice had disappeared. Go back. Venerable Lord Sword's voice was dry. Let's talk in the room. Venerable Lord Snow and Venerable Lord Frost were startled awake. Their hearts were filled with bitterness. Of course, it was necessary to return to the room for a discussion. However, just now, the three of them had stood stiffly for a full quarter of an hour, and it was still impossible to hide it from the eyes and ears of others. How much of the god's bone that Bing mentioned is true? Venerable Lord Sword frowned and asked. Venerable Lord Snow sighed and said, I'm afraid, 10%. 10. Venerable Lord Sword turned around abruptly and looked at Venerable Lord Snow's face. Yes. Venerable Lord Frost nodded. Why? Venerable Lord Sword's cultivation base was strong, but his heart was not as sharp as Venerable Lord Snow and Venerable Lord Frost. Generally speaking, among the five of them, Snow was the leader, followed by Ice and Frost. As for Saber and Sword, they did not have their own opinions and only knew how to charge and attack. I've been suspicious for so many years. Venerable Lord Snow frowned and said, where did the Four Seasons Tower's previous Venerable Lords go? There should be quite a number of Venerables before the five of us. Perhaps they're like us, all swords, blades, snow, frost, and ice. But there might be others. Venerable Lord Sword said, so many years have passed, they must be dead. If they don't die, how can we rise to the top? Do you really need to ask about this? Of course I know they're all dead. Even if he wasn't killed, he would have died of old age. Venerable Lord Snow spoke slowly, word by word, what I'm asking is, even if they're dead, where did the god's bones go? Venerable Lord Sword's jaw dropped. We all know that God's bones belong to the Four Seasons Tower in the end, and our ultimate goal is to collect all of them. You will be able to achieve an immortal and indestructible divine body. Venerable Lord Snow said slowly, logically speaking, since we have become the new Venerable Lords, the God's bones obtained by the previous seniors should be given to us to use, right? After all, one piece of God's bone was enough to make us who we are now. What about 3 pieces? What about 10 yuan? How about $20? As he spoke, Venerable Lord Sword and Venerable Lord Frost's expressions grew uglier. But the truth is that they didn't give it to us. So, why not? In other words, since the godly bones weren't given to us, who were they given to? Venerable Lord Snow's voice was getting softer and softer. The expression on his face was getting more and more uncertain. Based on Boss's great talent and bold vision, how could he have allowed such a treasure to be sealed there? There's one more thing. Even if we're lucky enough to obtain all the remaining godly bones, the godly bones we obtain will definitely not be complete. Why is that? Venerable Lord Frost exhaled and said in a low, eerie voice, I was thinking about this as well. Venerable Lord Sword's hands and feet were already cold. He stood there in a daze. His eyes were dull, and he seemed to have lost his spirit. After a long time, he suddenly coughed, his voice extremely muffled. A mouthful of viscous blood suddenly flowed from his mouth. But he still stood there blankly, as if he didn't realize that he had just vomited a mouthful of blood. His spirit, chi, and spirit had completely collapsed. He had been loyal to the Four Seasons Tower all his life, fighting in the martial world and risking his life hundreds and thousands of times. He had never doubted anything. However, today, in a short period of time, his lifelong pursuit and belief had completely collapsed. To Venerable Lord Sword, it was like the sky had collapsed. Sword! Venerable Lord Snow called out worriedly. Venerable Lord Sword turned his head like a puppet and said numbly, "What?" As soon as he uttered the word, he spat out another mouthful of blood. His complexion had turned a deathly shade of gray. At this moment, he actually had the will to die. He knew that his current emotional state had caused his cultivation method to collapse, his meridians to be disrupted, and his mystical chi to backfire. However, he allowed the collapsing mystical chi to run amok in his body without any restraint. His eyes had already turned into two black holes. They were like the eye sockets of a skeleton that had been buried in the ground for decades. Boom! Venerable Lord Frost sent Venerable Lord Sword flying with a slap. Endless frost fell on Venerable Lord Sword with a loud bang. He pounced on Venerable Lord Sword and choked his neck, roaring with tears in his eyes, "What do you want to do? Do you want to die? Who among us brothers doesn't want to die? However, can you die just because you want to? Seeking death in front of your own brothers, who do you think you are?" Venerable Lord Sword's throat was being choked, but he was finally clear-headed. His eyes blinked and regained their clarity. He grabbed Venerable Lord Frost's hand and murmured, "That's right, I can't die yet." He sat cross-legged on the ground, cultivating and combing through his meridians. Although his will to die had been dispelled, his expression was still filled with exhaustion. "What do we do now?" Venerable Lord Frost asked. "The only thing we can do now is to find Bing." Venerable Lord Snow's gaze flickered dangerously. "Only when we brothers are together can we discuss our future path. Otherwise, even if the three of us come up with an elaborate plan, it would be useless if Bing doesn't know about it." Venerable Lord Snow said faintly, "We are brothers. We live and die together. We die together. If we fight together. However, if we're truly disheartened and wish to quit the martial world, then we have to leave together." Venerable Lord Frost said loudly, "That's right. We live and die together, we fight and retreat together." His eyes met with Venerable Lord Snow's, reading each other's thoughts. Venerable Lord Snow had mentioned earlier that even if they were to quit the martial world, they had to do it together. They had been brothers for so many years. How could Venerable Lord Frost not know that Venerable Lord Snow had already thought of quitting the martial world when he said so? He had even decided to quit. Venerable Lord Sword was recuperating while Snow and Frost were guarding him. Quietly, the two brothers did not say a word, not even a word. What was in front of them was already enough. Vengeance was out of the question, but to continue, he was unwilling to do so no matter what. There was only one way left. Quit. However, if they did so, they would definitely face the Four Seasons Tower's endless pursuit. How could they really quit? The world is vast, the martial world is vast, but where can there be peace? After a long while, Venerable Lord Snow murmured in a daze. His words seemed to have touched Venerable Lord Frost's heart. He could not help feeling a lump in his throat, tears almost falling. Before today, who would have thought that they would be faced with such a situation? Suddenly, at this moment, dong, 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 someone knocked on the door. Venerable Lord Snow and Venerable Lord Frost stood up abruptly as if they had been struck by lightning. Exchanging glances, they could feel the paleness of each other's faces and the indescribable panic in their gazes. Venerable Lord Snow sucked in a deep breath, trying his best to keep his voice calm. "Who is it?" Outside, a clear voice rang out, "Are the seniors Snow and Frost inside?" "I'm Yun Yang, here to pay a visit." "Yun Yang? Young Master Yun?" Both of them were surprised. Young Master Yun's shadow seemed to be involved in some of the things that had happened, and they came to the capital. Later on, Lei Dongtian's incident had involved Yun Yang as well. They had guarded the valley to intercept the pursuers, and it had been Yun Yang who had charged out. Now, when they were waiting for such a moment and in such a situation, young Master Yun had actually appeared again. What was he doing here? Venerable Lord Frost snorted coldly and said, "So it's young Master Yun. However, we don't seem to have such a relationship with young Master Yun for a visit. I wonder what is young Master Yun's purpose for coming here this time." The venerable lords did not want to see anyone with their current mood. Their bad mood was already at its peak. What more Yun Yang, who had once been their enemy? He was someone who could not help but strike when he saw him. Outside, Yun Yang's voice spoke elegantly. "Of course our friendship isn't enough, but there are things that don't require friendship. I'm here to pay a visit at someone's request. If Venerable Lord isn't willing to meet me, then it's fine for me to return." Someone's request? Venerable Lord Frost's eyes glinted as he opened the door. "Who asked you to come?" Yun Yang was dressed in purple, standing elegantly outside the door. He said with a smile, "Let's talk about this after we enter." Of course, if Venerable Lord Frost wants me to say it at the door, it's fine as well. Inside, Venerable Lord Snow's voice rang out, "Since young Master Yun is here, you're a guest. Please come in and have some tea." Venerable Lord Frost opened the door and said, "Come in." Yun Yang smiled faintly and walked in elegantly. Venerable Lord Snow sat and looked at Yun Yang with a sharp gaze. "Young Master Yun, I wonder who asked you to come?" Yun Yang answered, "Him." With a flick of his wrist, a white bone that looked like jade appeared in his palm. The temperature in the room dropped by dozens of degrees abruptly. It was freezing cold. Second update. Chapter 564. Looking at the crystal-clear bone that resembled jade, Venerable Lord Sword, Snow, and Frost were shocked. It was as if they had been struck by lightning. All three pairs of eyes turned round at the same time. Venerable Lord Sword, who was meditating, widened his eyes as he spat out a mouthful of blood like an arrow, his face flushed red. Even Venerable Lord Snow's lips were trembling, his face turning as white as snow. He lived up to his name. Venerable Lord Frost shuddered as well. He froze on the spot, unmoving like a zombie. It was a very small piece of bone. It could even be said to be extremely short. If it were to be placed on a person's body, it would probably be a section of the human spine. Yun Yang looked at the ice god's bone in his hand, his expression filled with reluctance as if he was reluctant to hand it over. However, he still extended his hand and placed the ice god's bone on the table with a soft thud. The sound was extremely soft, but it pulled the trio back to their senses immediately. Their gazes focused on the ice bone on the table. "This is what Venerable Lord Ice entrusted to me before he died." Yun Yang took a deep breath and said, "To be honest, I actually don't want to help. But, as a fellow cultivator, I can't bear to refuse the final request of a powerhouse of the present age before his death." The three of them didn't say anything. They just stared blankly at the bone, staring at it without blinking. Before Venerable Lord Ice died, he had 2.5 requests. Yun Yang said, "One of them is to send the bone of the ice god back, especially when he specified that the bone of the ice god should be entrusted to his brothers and not to the Four Seasons Tower. This is also one of the main reasons why I'm willing to fulfill his request." Even though the Four Seasons Towers for Venerable Lords had previously promised not to be Yun Yang's enemy due to fate, the Four Seasons Towers' stance had always been against Yutang. This was something everyone was well aware of. The four Venerable Lords also knew that Yun Yang was someone who valued brotherhood. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base and knowledge as a Heaven Realm cultivator, even if he did not know the origin of the god's bone, he knew that it was not an ordinary item. It was of great help to one's cultivation. His willingness to return it was a great favor. The three venerable ones trembled at the same time. Their eyes were filled with tears, and they were extremely sad. The other request is for me to tell his brothers to avenge him. Yunyang said. Venerable Lord Sword panted violently, his throat producing a noise that sounded like he was pulling a windmill, extremely piercing to the ears. Who killed him? Who is it? Venerable Lord Snow's tone was devoid of his usual coldness. Both of his hands were trembling so much that he could barely clench his fists. He reached out with great effort to grab the bone of the ice god, feeling the icy aura firsthand. Tears finally flowed from his eyes like spring water. Venerable Lord Frost's frosty aura soared into the sky as he turned his head abruptly. Who killed my brother? Are you from the concourse of the underworld? This was almost the most direct judgment of the three venerable lords. The four venerable lords were renowned, but there were few who possessed such capabilities in this world. Even if they had such capabilities, most of them would be wary of the Four Seasons Tower's vengeance and would not actually kill them. Only the concourse of the underworld had completely fallen out with the Four Seasons Tower. They would not rest until one of them was dead. Many of them had joined forces to attack Venerable Lord Ice, injuring him severely. It was reasonable that they would pursue and kill him. Yunyang said, although this person was also a renowned assassin in the martial world, he wasn't from the concourse of the underworld. That person was Hong Zhan from the Hall of Crimson Blade. Hong Zhan. Venerable Lord Snow let out a shrill roar. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Venerable Lord Sword stared straight at Yunyang. You had a total of 2.5 requests just now. My brother, what was the half request? Yunyang said, This is a shame. Venerable Lord Ice had only left behind a sentence that came out of the blue. It was, to let my brothers read my message first and then make a decision carefully. It's just a random sentence. I don't know if Venerable Lord Ice didn't finish his sentence before he died, or if that's the case. That's why this third request is only this. That's why I said it's half a request, Yunyang pondered. This sentence was added by Yunyang himself, but deep in his bones, Yunyang believed that it was impossible that Venerable Lord Ice would not pass the relevant message to them, based on their brotherly bond. However, Yunyang was afraid that they would be in a state of panic now. What if they did not see the relevant message? Therefore, he had specifically reminded them here, using it as an opportunity. As soon as he said that, the three venerable ones looked at each other, then at each other. Their eyes seemed to be in deep thought. Hong Zhan. Hong Zhan. Hong Zhan. Venerable Lord Frost lowered his head, murmuring. The resentment in his murmurs could not be washed away even with all the water in the river. Venerable Lord Snow gripped the bone of Ice God tightly, tears falling from his eyes like pearls from a broken necklace. Raising his head, he murmured, The 5 of us brothers have roamed the world for decades, spending more time together than apart. We've almost never been separated. Who would have thought that Saber God would perish some time ago? The brothers were heartbroken. Who would have thought that one more would be gone today? He closed his eyes and 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks. At this moment, wrinkles visibly appeared on his originally smooth face. The hair on his head that was originally half black and half white had turned snow-white almost in the blink of an eye. There was not a single strand of hair that was tainted. His hair had turned white in an instant. Seeing Venerable Lord Snow's senile appearance, Venerable Lord Sword and Venerable Lord Frost turned pale with fright. Snow! Both of them exclaimed in unison. Venerable Lord Snow turned a deaf ear, but his demeanor was even older and more dispirited. He took a deep breath and sighed deeply. His tears never stopped, and there was a sense of disheartened exuding from him without any concealment. Venerable Lord Frost and Venerable Lord Sword looked at Venerable Lord Snow in a daze, suddenly realizing that Venerable Lord Snow cared so much about the truth of God's bone. The impact of this incident on him was unusually heavy. Perhaps, it could be said that Venerable Lord Ice's death had greatly hurt Venerable Lord Snow, while the truth of God's bone had become a reality, turning him into a hopeless despair. With these two things stacked on top of each other, Venerable Lord Ice's life creed had completely collapsed, just like Venerable Lord Sword's. An outsider would not be able to feel such pain unless they had experienced it personally. Yun-yang looked at them indifferently, unmoved from the beginning to the end. He had never been a cold-blooded person, but looking at the inexplicable pain of Venerable Lord Snow and the others, Yun-yang was only elated. Have you finally tasted what it feels like to see your dearest brother die? How is it? Does it feel good? Does it feel good? Have you finally experienced what it feels like to have 8 of my brothers perish right beside me at Tianxian Cliff all those years ago? Can't you accept it just because one of you died? What about me? Who can understand my pain? Chapter 565. The Four Seasons Tower has wronged all of you, using you in the matter of God's bone. So what if your fate is rough and bleak? Back then, 8 of my brothers died. Among the murderers, the people we protected with all our hearts were betrayed and contributed to the process. Can you all understand how cold my heart is? Now, it's far from enough. There will be more to come. Continue to taste the pain of being helpless and helpless. Young Master Yun. Venerable Lord Snow stood up slowly, his snow-white robes fluttering despite the absence of wind. Thank you, young Master Yun, for your righteousness and for bringing us the last message of our brothers. However, I still want to ask one more thing. It's not that I'm doubting young Master Yun. I hope young Master Yun won't mind. Yun Yang's expression turned sorrowful at once as he said bitterly, please ask, Venerable Lord Snow. Although we've never been on good terms before, we've crossed paths after all. Venerable lords are true to their words and the past is still fresh in our minds. A good deed is a good deed, and it's only right that it comes to this. Regarding Venerable Lord Ice, I'll tell you everything I know. This is my last respect to a strong man and also an explanation for the past. Thank you, young Master Yun, for your kindness. Venerable Lord Snow said slowly in a low voice. We want to know, how did Hong Zhan kill our brothers? Was young Master there? Venerable Lord Sword and Venerable Lord Frost looked over at the same time. Speaking of which, this is really a coincidence. I happened to be there at the right time and witnessed the incident with my own eyes. Due to some reasons, I had to leave the city to settle some matters. Yun-yang brushed past his own matters vaguely. Yun-yang had caused quite a commotion these few days, almost everyone knew about it. Naturally, the 3 venerable lords knew about it as well, but they were not in the mood to care about what Yun-yang had left the city for. There was only one thing they were concerned about. At the time, I went to a more secluded hill and found that someone was paying respects there. I was surprised by the weather and the situation. When I went over to take a look, I was surprised to find that it was Venerable Lord Ice. Venerable Lord Ice was already severely injured then. Venerable Lord Snow sighed sadly. That should be the cenotaph that Ice had built for his son. When Ice caused the destruction of his family, he didn't even get his son's belongings. Only the gold and silver that his son had given him when he left Tiantang City was left, he buried it there. I even worked with him on this matter. As for serious injuries, Venerable Lord Snow and the other 2 had a sharp look in their eyes. Venerable Lord Ice had to bear the burden of being hunted down by the concourse of the underworld and the Four Seasons Tower. However, there was no need to mention this to Yun-yang. Back then, Venerable Lord Ice looked very sad. We met by chance and it was difficult to speak of our shallow acquaintances. I was just about to show myself and leave after a few pleasantries, but the leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade, Hong Zhan, came with his 5 subordinates. Yun Yang looked pained. I witnessed the entire battle. It was a pity that my cultivation base was too low. Venerable Lord Frost rolled his eyes. He thought to himself, your cultivation level is considered low? With your current cultivation, even if it's not unprecedented, it's enough for you to look down on your generation. It's just that you'll never help us. If you'd been willing to help Ice sincerely, perhaps Ice wouldn't have fallen in this battle. Despite knowing this, Venerable Lord Snow still said something. Both of them were on opposing sides. Yun Yang's willingness to send a letter after the incident and not devour God's bone was already a great favor. It would be unreasonable to ask for more. Both sides had a disagreement and a fight broke out. In the end, Venerable Lord Ice was severely injured, but he also killed 3 of the other party's men. At the very last moment, Venerable Lord Ice suddenly called out my name. Yun Yang looked confused. I was quite confident in my cultivation base and thought that Venerable Lord Ice didn't know that I was nearby. Although I planned to show myself, I wanted to stay out of it because of the arrival of the people from the Hall of Crimson Blade. Venerable Lord Frost harumphed coldly, forcefully holding back his words. Your cultivation base is impressive, but it's still wishful thinking for you to hide your tracks from us, Snow, Frost, and Ice, in this icy environment. Then, Venerable Lord Ice charged towards me and entrusted me with these matters. Then he turned around and self-destructed, and this, Yun Yang spoke with a confused expression, as if he did not know what it was. Self-destruct, how could it be? Venerable Lord Frost mumbled to himself. Yun Yang still looked puzzled as he said, I'm full of doubts about this as well. Although Venerable Lord Ice was severely injured, he could charge to my side and had the time to entrust those matters to me. There might have been a chance for him to break out of the encirclement, but why didn't he do so? Why did he fight to his death instead? This is really illogical. To put it bluntly, if it weren't for the fact that I always keep my promises, would definitely not have made this trip. Honestly speaking, this matter is full of doubts, but the situation at that time was indeed like that. I have already said everything I have to say. If you still have doubts, then forgive me for being powerless. Venerable Lord Snow and the other 2 heaved a long sigh. As veterans of the martial world, they naturally understood Yun Yang's current thoughts, but they understood Venerable Lord Ice's thoughts even better. Why didn't he escape? Why did he fight to his death? Why? It was truly an inexplicable bitterness and tears of blood. Putting himself in Venerable Lord Ice's shoes, standing before the grave of the son he had killed, he had been deceived to such an extent in this lifetime, he was severely injured and on the brink of death, he could not even return to the 4 Seasons Tower that he had always relied on. The world was vast, but there was no place for him to stand. He was really disheartened to the extreme. He really didn't want to live anymore. Is Hong Zhan still alive? Venerable Lord Snow asked coldly. He's probably the only one who's completely intact in that battle. Yun Yang said, among his 5 subordinates, 3 died and 2 were severely injured. Even the 2 who survived are half dead. Forgive me for being frank, but just by looking at the battle, I can only feel that Hong Zhan's cultivation base and combat power are much higher than Venerable Lord Ice's. Perhaps, this is the main reason why Venerable Lord Ice resorted to such an extreme tactic. Venerable Lord Snow gritted his teeth and said, the leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade, of course, his cultivation base is powerful. His reputation is well-deserved. His chilling laughter was laced with indescribable venom. Yun Yang, an outsider, could not help but shudder when he heard it. We thank young Master Yun once again for your letter. Venerable Lord Snow stood up and walked to the door, speaking hoarsely, the 3 of us brothers owe young Master Yun a great favor. If there's a chance in the future, we'll definitely repay you. We won't go back on our words. There was a sense of kindness in his words, but at the same time, he was also asking the guest to leave. Yunyang stood up in understanding and said, "I didn't let you down after all. I should take my leave now. 3 venerable lords, please restrain your grief. After all, the deceased has passed away." Venerable Lord Snow waved his hand tiredly, his expression weary. "Go, farewell." Yunyang turned and walked out of the inn. He stood in the hall for a while but did not hear any movement from the room. It was as if there was no living person inside. Yunyang was silent for a moment before he finally left. He went straight to Yang Buitao's and his wife's graves. "Yang Buitao, the grudge of life with your family has come to an end just like that. Don't worry, your youngest son will be fine." Yunyang turned and left. On the same night, Tiantang City was suddenly in a state of turmoil. Blood rained everywhere, and everything was dyed red. The 3 secret bases that the Hall of Crimson Blade had set up in Tiantang City were suddenly ambushed. The 3 attackers charged in and killed every living thing that could breathe like they were chopping vegetables. They had killed every living thing in sight, even the precious mystical beasts in the base, the dogs that guarded the door, and the chickens and wild cats that were foraging nearby had been decapitated as well. It was truly a massacre that left no one alive. Although this massacre was extreme, it was still considered a Jianghu vendetta. Unfortunately, one of the 3 secret strongholds, as well as the 8 people who were in charge of this place, had used some unknown means to set up their stronghold in the 4th prince's courtyard. Even though it was the prince's residence, the 3 men were still fearless. They had suddenly appeared in the middle of the night and killed their way in. Everyone in the prince's residence had been killed, including the 300 guards, the army, the butler, and the maids. None of them had survived. Such a shocking massacre had shaken the entire Tiantang city. However, something even more shocking had yet to come. In the second half of the night, after the last Hall of Crimson Blade's base had been forcefully removed by the 3 men, a clear voice rang in Tiantang City's night sky like the roar of a dragon and a tiger. "Hong Zhan. Aren't you known to be unfathomable? Why are you acting like a coward now? What right do you have to lead the Hall of Crimson Blade with such behavior? Come out and accept your death." Once the voice rang out, a large group of Yutong experts sprinted in that direction. It was only a moment before the voice rang out again, "Hong Zhan. Come out if you're a man." He shouted 3 times in a row, but there was no response from the people around him. When Yutong's experts had rushed to the top floor of Tower to Heaven Inn, where the voice had come from, they could only see more than 40 bloody heads piled up amidst the frost. They were all experts from the Hall of Crimson Blade. Other than the heads, there were also more than 40 blood sabers that had been broken into halves placed neatly on the snowy ground. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.